Hey, everyone, what's up? Happy Halloween. Apologies for being a bit late here. Some technical snafus. Seems like I'm having trouble screen sharing. So we're ready to kick off the show here. I'm going to make sure everything's coming in okay. Just as I switch over here to the chat, say hello to everyone that's dropped by to watch the show tonight. Can you guys hear me okay? Ask questions, dibs, all equip, Mr. Morse, Amnesia Hage, Sidefish, Thought Drifter, Scaredy Cat, Stranger Than Fiction. Nice to see you. Jetto, David Muir, Mikey. All you guys, welcome to the show. I hope you're all doing well. And this is, usually it was an annual type of show I would do, going way back to the days of Free Radio Revolution, where I discuss horror films on Halloween. It's a pretty fitting time to discuss these topics. And I've noticed a ton of themes in the horror films, especially a lot of the ones that have been coming out over the past couple of years. So we're going to look at some of those themes and how, a lot of this is tying back to some of the major agendas that are being pushed in the New World Order, including depopulation, Agenda 21, gender transformation, future human beings, transhumanism, and there's just feminism. There's so many examples that we could bring up of films. I watched a lot of horror films, especially as a kid. Is kind of my favorite type of movie to watch, horror, sci-fi, stuff like that. Going to the movie store and picking them up. And I think a lot of us probably come from just consuming our entertainment, not really thinking about how it might be impacting us or programming us. And it's an easy thing to do because most people these days are oblivious to what the video games and movies and television shows and their devices, their Black Mirrors, are actually doing to them. And this is a lot by design. I think horror movies are very telling in a lot of ways, and I'll give you some great examples as we go through the night here. One of them that springs up to mind would be slasher films, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, and I've seen a lot of them. It's a genre that really popped up back in the 1970s. I've got this horror music playing in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but probably turn that off in a little bit. But slasher films are a great example of a popular horror genre that a lot of people will watch on a regular basis, especially around this time. The series Halloween, the Halloween movies, which I actually know quite a bit about, the John Carpenter original Halloween film, was really the one that kicked off the slasher genre. And it's still going to this day, that particular franchise. And some people might say for better or for worse. I would say definitely for worse. And it has taken some really nasty turns in terms of the types of programming that is in the latest iteration of Halloween 2018, which I did a full review on Supreme Lord Commander. So if you haven't seen it and you're interested in getting my view on that particular film, definitely go and check that out. But the slasher genre, in many ways, in my opinion, deals with depopulation. And I think it's no surprise that these films are very popular and consistently coming out. So if we think about all the different slasher films, and this is just the first one I'm going to start with, I'll get into some of the depopulation and Agenda 21 and environmental type horrors and many others. But I'm unable to share my screen, so that was why we're a bit late behind. But you see Cookie here, Harry Cookie Monster. Welcome to the show, by the way, buddy. I hope you're doing well.
Hello. Yes, so we're slow on the unmute button.
It's cool. So are you hearing that atmospheric music in the background? Is that distracting you at all?
No, I can't hear it.
Oh, you can. Sorry,
It
might as well
sounds
just
like it's just stopped. I could hear it earlier, but it's not distracted me.
Yeah, you know what? I'll just turn it off because basically I can hear it and probably nobody else is hearing it. So it was just there to add to the whole.
You
Uh,
sure it's not just all in your head?
yeah. So thank you very much for sharing the screen there and showing folks some of these flicks here. Perhaps you could put a search in for slasher flicks because I think we'll start with those ones as they seem to be pretty popular. You've got Michael Myers up there on the screen, which is a great example of the Halloween or the slasher genre. And yeah, I think it's a fitting thing to start with Halloween itself. So yeah, if you put in slasher movies, you should be able to get some of the more iconic type of slasher films. So mentioning Halloween, the original Halloween series, if you're not familiar, the John Carpenter kind of had an idea for a horror film after being influenced by the movie Black Christmas, which is a Canadian horror film, which in ways was this seed that started the whole slasher genre, but it really took off in earnest with the Halloween series. The original Halloween film was supposed to be The Babysitter Killers was the name of the initial sort of script. So it wasn't supposed to be set on Halloween. It was only when John Carpenter and his partner, his girlfriend, I don't know if it was his girlfriend or his wife at the time, who co-wrote the script together. She came up with the idea that I think it's Deborah Hill. I'm not sure of her name, but she came up with the idea, well, why don't we call it Halloween and set it on Halloween? And then John Carpenter looked, and to his surprise, no one had ever used the title Halloween before in a film. So he took the title and they set it on Halloween, and the rest is history. Or maybe her story at this point in time with the latest iteration of Halloween, when you look at the incredible levels of feminism that was in the and the anti-male sentiments in the 2018 Halloween film. I think the original Halloween is just a very simple, low-budget flick that works well in terms of atmosphere and had a great theme. It had a great soundtrack to it. Cookie, have you seen the original Halloween?
Yes, yeah.
What are your thoughts on?
Well, it was one of the first horror films that I thought was actually, worth the time watching.
Yeah.
Not just because it had Jamie Lee Curtis in it, who at the time, I know she might be a bit old now, and whatever. But at the time, she was new to the screen. I think was it her first acting role?
Yeah, and do you know
that starring role?
Did you know that she's the daughter of Tony Curtis and the woman that played the original sort of blonde, the girl in the shower from Psycho? I can't remember.
I didn't realize it was her.
Yeah. So so I can't remember her name. So probably somebody in the chat will say it. But the Jamie Lee Curtis came from a famous acting. Her parents were very famous actors, sort of thing, and that was her first film and her most famous and the one that she's most remembered for to this day. And she gave a really good performance. But it's my view on it is it's a cool, creepy little horror film that was really well shot and has a great atmosphere, and really it's the soundtrack of the film that really is the most memorable part. Which is very simple, sort of, but it just like Jaws, with the 2-note sort of dum 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 dum. The simplicity of the horror theme of Halloween really brought it home. And so when John Carpenter initially showed the rough cut of the film to the executives of the studio, without any of the soundtrack to it, they were not at all impressed. They thought they had a turkey on their hands, sort of thing. And then John Carpenter came back and he came up with the theme for the film and then put that in, and then right away it had a huge impact. So it does show you to a certain extent how much music can set the tone for a film and really enhance the experience. right?
Definitely, absolutely. I think it was KJ many years ago did a little video clip, a sort of reworking of Mary Poppins, and I don't know if that even still exists on YouTube or if they've taken it down for copyright reasons or some silliness like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it worked very, very effectively at demonstrating how the use of the music and the audio could radically change your perception of the image on screen. So he took some clips from Mary Poppins, re-edited them, changed the sound to be like a horrific soundtrack, like a horror movie soundtrack, and then renamed it Scary Mary. And
Wow.
it worked. Yeah, you
Yes,
watched
KJ
it.
Osborne.
I think it was him, yeah, because it was the
Yeah.
Scariest Movie Ever channel.
Awesome. Yeah.
I remember it from years ago.
I know KJ's going live later, so I'll probably tune into his show tonight to see. But yeah, that's excellent. It does show you that you can take out music. I mean, some films purposely. I think of an example that don't have music but still are very effective. So, No Country for Old Men has almost no music in it, no sort of themes or background music or anything. I think the only music that appears is like on a car radio or something like that. So yeah, it's an interesting sort of experiment. But yeah, many of the most terrifying movies that gained mass sort of appeal and people think fondly of do have that very strong theme. Psycho, right? With the shrieking, probably the most. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say it's very staccato. I know it's like a high-pitched screeching sound, but I think one of the main differences you can notice is if you watch these kind of movies, and this can be used in other styles of movies as well, not just horror movies, but when they're trying to draw out the suspension, they give you what would be called like a pad sound, continuous drone, like strings, continuous, that kind of drawn out frequency. Yeah. And then whenever they want to give you the impression of impending doom at any second, they resort to staccato, the very kind of sound effect. Yeah. Yeah. And obviously with something like Psycho and with Halloween, they're deliberately using quite high-pitched frequencies, so it grates on your nerves even more.
Yeah, yeah, and a mixture of the two, because you have that dum, 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 and then do, with the Halloween.
It's something you can experiment with yourself quite easily, and find a movie where the scenes in it you find quite horrific, and then just turn the audio off and put some happy, jolly music in the background instead. And notice how it changes your emotional sensation about the imagery that you're looking at. It can be a bad thing, in the way that it can desensitize. And people like Tarantino have played on this, where they give people a pop song to listen to while they show you graphic violence. So it desensitizes you to the graphic violence because you're associating it to something that you used to see as perfectly normal, everyday, happy, no danger, normal life kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All very deliberate manipulations that intrinsically rely on how you react to audio cues. Visual cues, video and imagery tend to capture people's attention such that they go into that classic hypnotic kind of state, the alpha wave state. But then the mind seems to utilize audio as the cue to move, the impetus to move, the rhythm moves you. The imagery doesn't give you the rhythm. The heartbeat of the audio track, the rhythm gives you that sense of movement and continuation or impending doom. Oh, are you still there? Have I lost connection or have you lost connection? Or did you think, oh,
I'm sorry.
he's explaining, I'm going to run to the kitchen,
Yeah,
grab a beer.
I left a message on the side there because when I was doing the whole setup, I was hoping to sneak away to do a quick bathroom break, but because everything was snafu, I was like, oh. Anyways, I'm back. Thank you. Yes, and I totally agree exactly with what you're saying. How and this is one of the reasons why horror films are so powerful. And it's just another example of how horror films are so effective, and how they can be extremely effective is that they tap into the deeper sort of fears that we all inherently have, and it can really push those fears, like dig deep into them, and that's one of the interesting elements of horror films that tap into so many of the primordial sort of fears that we have built in us as human beings. I mean, with children, it's interesting with children because when you see what you've got on the screen here with a lot of the horror movie sort of characters, you've got Michael Myers and Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, you got the Scream Ghost, the Pinhead, and Chucky from the Child's Play movies, which I've never seen, by the way. But
I saw them
they're all
VHS.
Yeah, they're all humans, though, which is very interesting because I don't know if you know this, but with children, it's a universal sort of thing that children have nightmares. I mean, for good reasons. They're very vulnerable, right? And they're scared of things in the dark. And this is actually a human evolution sort of thing where, people are inherently afraid of monsters because for so much of our sort of existence, and this is hardwired in our DNA, we've had predators to deal with and things that will eat you in the night. Lions and tigers and bears, basically. So the fact that children fear monsters, this is like when children have dreams, it's actually almost always, or nightmares, more aptly put, it's almost always monsters that they fear, monsters in the night sort of thing. And then as we get older, it seems like we tend to fear humans more than anything else. Mm-hmm. Because humans are we learn that humans are more cunning and more intelligent and more capable of creating, mass sort of slaughter.
Yeah, humans can be more monstrous.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know that sounds counterintuitive, and especially in light of a lot of the current propaganda narratives that are trying to normalize what would have a while ago been called something monstrous, something abnormal, because the word monster can also imply abnormality.
Yeah.
So what used to be considered abnormal or monstrous is being normalized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
exactly.
What then are children afraid of if they used to be afraid of monsters and now there's no more monsters?
Well, I think no, that they still are. Like it's in our DNA, and that's so like I think all kids are afraid of monsters under the bed or in the closet kind of thing, because it's just something that it's like, okay, so I was having a discussion with a friend earlier today about this sort of thing, and it's like an example when you think about it is that if you go out at night sort of thing, if you're in the woods, right, if you're going back to more like a caveman state where you're outside of, say, civilization can keep you safe and make you feel safer sort of thing. But when you're in an environment that you're not familiar with, right, then all of a sudden it's the unknown that scares you. What was that noise? What was the cracking branch that you heard? Is it a bear that's coming after me? So you're inherently afraid of things that are going to come and eat you, basically hunt you down, predators. So I believe this is why children inherently fear predators, just like all other animals have a natural fear. Like birds are terrified of cats. Maybe they've never seen a cat before, but as soon as they see one, they're going to be terrified, right? Unless they're a big bird, right? A bird of prey or something like that.
Cats are terrified of cucumbers.
Or that's interesting.
Well, it just occurred to me because you're talking about that kind of legacy
Yeah.
memory or legacy knowledge of danger. Supposedly, this
Uh-huh.
is the academic explanation for it. Cats are scared of cucumbers because the shape reminds them of a snake.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it totally makes sense then. And that's it. So that's what I see. Like I see that, like I know that things are changing, and that's why I said with adults as we mature, we're not as afraid. Like we know that we can tame nature. It's like you could go out in the wilderness, but you could have say for instance bear spray or something, and a machete or even a gun or something, and that fire, things like that. That you can take care of nature uh, in most of those situations if you're well prepared. But what we really can't deal with, or which is much more of a trouble, is actually other human beings
Yeah.
thinking, predator human beings that would stalk us in the night, sort of thing. So I think that's why horror films and stalker films generally do feature human type predators and not so much beast and animals, although there are a number of films that do have that sort of theme in them. um,
It's a little bit of a transition as well because I just spotted that graphic and it was a part of. I was thinking about the mask effect.
mhm.
We're afraid of humans, but we put a mask on that human, and we know intrinsically, we know whether people are aware of this or not, but we have that innate knowledge that the mask implies a hidden personality. So the mask that they
Yes.
put on the outside is their shield, it's their skin that they present to the world. But it's the human being behind the mask that we're actually afraid of. The mask just represents the transition from the monster that you were afraid of. The monster is anthropomorphized by putting it onto a human face.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. It also, yeah, in a way, it allows the human to adopt a more, like, it frees them of their their humanness, really. If you think
Yeah.
about it, like you could put on a mask and all of a sudden you become more powerful,
Mm.
especially if it's a scary mask, right? Because people are going to be
And
scared.
it gives you an illusion of justification that you can do things that your real self, your true self, would never do.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that we see with the NWO dealing with humans, excellent examples are the furries and the cosplays and the bronies. Right?
But,
People dressing up
uh,
as
sorry to interrupt
yeah,
you. I was just, you made me think, let's look up cosplay horror.
yeah, sure,
Because you'll
absolutely,
find people dressing up as Jason and Michael Myers and what they've been doing that for years.
excellent. Yeah, bring that up if you can. And yeah, this is again, many ways when we think about it, the way that they are dehumanizing us is often addicting us to these types of releases, right? Where we're able to free ourselves from our sort of human prison, if you will. That there is a sort of ecstasy that comes from adopting some other form. All of a sudden, you have left the shell of humanity, of whatever your, and again, a lot of these people that would do this would be in a weakened sort of lower frequency sort of state where they don't have a strong self-esteem, and they're not comfortable in their skin and stuff like that, and we're manufacturing people like this with the type of the type of education system and the type of programming that people are getting, and the daily assault in the media that in many ways works to undermine our strength as human beings. So people, more and more, Halloween is an everyday thing, and they want people to embrace this. The drag culture is an excellent example of that, where it's like, and I've shown this with the CBC and other networks that have regular drag shows and trans kids shows and stuff like this on primetime, in which these characters they show them in their real life, and they show them and they look depressed and unfulfilled and withdrawn and all that. But then when they put on the makeup and the wigs and the boobs and whatever else, the dress, that's when they become liberated.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, in many ways, and you know what, an excellent example. Maybe you've seen this film. It's quite well known. It's called A Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, I've got it on VHS.
Yes, and it's one of those flicks that, quote unquote cult classic, which is an interesting term as well, CC33, but cult classic. And you'd wonder sometimes what really kind of pushed a film like that out and made people emulate it, because one of the things that shocked me, when I think I was about 14 or 15, and I was at a party, and I remember it vividly, where there was live bands. It was really cool, and we're drinking alcohol and all that, and smoking drugs, and doing whatever. And there was a group of people that were dressed in drag, and so it was around Halloween, and I had no clue. I was like, what why are you dressing up like trashy horrors, like, why are men dressing up? And they explained to me that they were going to the midnight screening of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I didn't know what that was. And so this is, in many ways, it's an indoctrination, a cult sort of film that came out, I believe, in the late 1970s.
80s, I think, early 80s. Although I'm not sure on that.
Yeah, and that features transsexuals from Transylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Curry, who constantly plays the Baphomet character in so many films, and in this film as well, in a way, the transsexual sort of Baphomet. But yeah, the cosplay sort of genre, I looked into it. I did a big video on it, so I know a little bit more about it. And I know that it didn't originate with the Rocky Horror Picture Show. In fact, you can go back 100 years and people were doing that type of stuff. But really, in terms of popular culture, I think you could trace this cosplay back to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And it's very interesting, because what are people doing with the Rocky Horror Picture Show? Well, it's men dressing up as women and women dressing up as men, which is basically commonplace. I mean, it's YouTube 101. It's it's what the most popular people these days do. It's what the New World Order is programming, blurring the lines between the two sexes. So I find that very interesting, that this cult classic is still to this day, that there's these rituals that are involved. And it's like, from what my understanding was from that day when I was like 14 or 15 or whatever, that it's a midnight ritual, like that they do it every Halloween, that these theaters would show Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight, and all the people that would come to the theater would dress up as characters from this. So I find that kind of creepy when you think about it, because you're lulled in. It's a fun, campy type of film, right? It's got a lot of catchy tunes. So, and these musicals, I often find, are highly weaponized for New World Order programming. So I was sorry. Go ahead.
I'm not certain of this, but I think it was originally written to be primarily a stage production, because what's his name, Richard O'Brien, the guy who wrote it. This is classic. I think he was deliberately either tasked with this thing to be done, or he come up with the idea, but it's perfectly geared to capture the attention and the enthusiasm, the energy of college and university students, because it's the kind of thing that they can put on as a production. It's fairly easy to do. There's no major requirements in terms of set technicalities. There's no major production value. There can be if they want to, but it's not really required for the storyline. Yeah, mainly it's just a singing, dancing comedy show. And in that way, it becomes this student cultural cult effect, which then bleeds into them deciding to make a movie out of it, and it becoming that regular event of, like you say, people going to midnight showings. I've been to one, yeah, back in the 90s.
Did you dress up?
Yes, yeah. I went as Meatloaf's character. Is it Eddie?
Oh yeah, Meatloaf is in it. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah. Well, that'd be the one to go as.
Well, this is also very indicative of how the whole storyline is subtle manipulation, because he's the only character who goes as his true gender and really as his true self, because he's unapologetically individualistic. Yeah, he just does his thing, and he doesn't care what the other people and the authorities say about it. And he's the one that gets sacrificed and eaten.
Wow. So he would almost represent the alpha male type character.
Yes.
That's
certainly the patriarchy.
I've only seen it once, and it was so long ago, probably as a teen. I certainly didn't go to see it when I saw, when my reaction, I still remember this really well. My reaction was, these people are creeps, Why would a man dress up as a woman, but it's been absolutely normalized at this point in time. It actually is 1975.
75.
I just checked it, but you're absolutely right about Richard O'Brien here, and it began as a 1973 musical stage production. So very interesting.
It's while he was still in university, I seem to remember. I'm not sure if he'd graduated or he was still involved somehow in university life.
Yeah, it is, and it's amazing. I know there was one recently, and I say recently, probably within 10 years, that it's probably even further back than that, but it was called Hedwig and the Angry.
Have you liked that, or have I liked that? Oh, either you've been like that, or I've been dropped and I'm in a phantom room. It's Halloween, I'm in a phantom room. I would guess. Let me check the main YouTube stream.
Hello?
My YouTube stream is lagging behind terribly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool.
It was you that dropped. I wasn't sure if I'd.
Yeah, it was me. Yeah. Sorry. And we switched around. I was using a different browser before, and then I switched because I wanted to share the screen, and I wasn't able to. So that's why Cookie's sharing the screen, sort of thing. So pardon the. I just got booted. It wasn't booted. It was just technical snafu. I came right back in. Anyways. Very interesting. I find this pretty fascinating. Because I think about cult classics, right, and this cultish behavior, because we know cults, right, and how when it comes to secret societies and cults, I mean that's kind of the world that we live in. This cultish sort of attitude that is proliferated, and everybody kind of joins these cults. I mean, you could say. People say this about the truth movement, and to a certain extent, it was true. I remember back in the day where everybody was with everybody sort of thing, and people would say, that's a cult, it's a truth cult, and all that. So like for me, I needed to distance myself massively from that type of thinking, because there's just so much negative energy that comes from being in any form of cult. But if we think about religions, a lot of religions would fall under the cult. Scientology, Mormonism, things like that, right? Where it is actually a ritual sort of cult, and many of the surveillance agencies have cult-like sort of behaviors and ascendancy, right? Where you have to move your way up in the ranks. Satanism is a great example of cults. So I find it interesting when films become cult classics. And why do they become cult classics? Well, you would be led to believe that just people embrace the film, like that they saw it as when they were younger, and they just loved the film, there was a feeling of euphoria or something that they had that they remember and that they stay with. And a lot of the programming, this is where the cosplay comes in, because a lot of what people are cosplaying as is what they grew up as children. So most of the people that do cosplay are adults. It's almost entirely adults that are in the cosplay realm. And they're playing Halloween on a regular basis. So you have the Comic Cons and the sci-fi conventions and the Star Trek conventions and the Star Wars conventions and the Game of Thrones conventions. You have these festivals like the Big Lebowski Festival, which is in multiple cities all around the world. It gets bigger every year, and everybody dresses up as the characters. And so you have all these people enacting cultish sort of behaviors. And I think this works really well for our handlers, our controllers. Like, this is just a way of controlling people. And so I would suspect that a lot of these cult classic type films were not as organic as we're led to believe, in the sense that in many ways, and I can recall this growing up and watching cable TV and stuff, and where you'd have these sort of arts channels that would, this cult classic, it's now a cult classic. It's like reinforcing the narrative of something. Like, you want something to be a cult. Well, you can make it a cult if you have enough resources at your disposal. Right? So if you have publications, if you have magazines, if you have sci-fi shows, for instance. So if you're like Disney, for instance, Disney creates its own cults easily, right? And it can create its anti-cults, and it's, like all these different things where people think that they're part of something that is actually organic, but really it's from far. Yeah, it's a manufactured thing. So that's the way I kind of look at, like, I don't mean to belittle people that would fall into these things, because I think we can all fall into them. I mean, just like you said, where you attended the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because you want to fit in, right? And you're in college or in university, and it's a time where you free yourself of your inhibitions. So it's a perfect sort of programming time where you are experimenting. You're experimenting with alcohol and drugs, psychedelics. You're experimenting with music, and then of course with film and art, right? And these are video games. All these things tie into adolescence and coming of age, and then discovering yourself as a person. And
exploration.
And I think it's very interesting because this is an easy time. I mean, you're getting people when they're young, and this is part of what we have happening again and again and again, where horror movies, like all movies, not just horror films, but horror films are constantly rebooted and sent out. And when you think about, like, you reboot a franchise, so say Halloween's another example, since we were talking about Halloween, and you reboot the franchise for every new generation. And Halloween's done that pretty much, where you had the original Halloweens, which were, the first one was in the late 70s, and then I think the sequel, the second one, was in early, maybe 1980 and 81, around there. And then the third one came out, which totally strayed away from the Michael Myers formula, which is a very interesting flick in itself, because it's dealing with massive programming and massive sort of infanticide, where they're killing children by getting them to wear masks. Have you ever seen that one, Halloween 3, by the way?
I think I might even still have that one on VHS somewhere.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on that particular film?
Before we get into that, I want to mention a couple of things from what you've said.
Yeah, absolutely.
I left it open with this picture, this image.
Yeah.
Because when you were explaining about the cult elements, I would say as well to that, the system prefers people to think in a cult-like manner. You could also see it as, or you could call it, ideological jingoism or ideological tribalism. It's a way of getting people to have an attitude, or to build a foundation within their thinking, that there is a team that they join. It's like brand loyalty. Yeah, brand loyalty is essential to modern marketing financial systems. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the same way, if they can encourage the populace to think in a cult-like manner, then that enables the various propaganda to play one group off against another.
Yep.
Because if you're pro Rocky Horror, then you can be played off against somebody who's anti Rocky Horror. Mm-hmm. And all of that relies on the kind of mentality, the kind of thinking processes that are epitomized by what people know when you refer to a cult. Yeah, so when you say to people, oh, they're in a cult, people know, oh, that means they got very rigid thinking and they don't like anyone that's not in their membership, all that kind of stuff. That's exactly the kind of thing we're describing when we're talking about how some people like this kind of stuff and some people don't. Yeah, and how some people will feel defensive over one side or the other and vice versa. You know, some people feel they've got to aggressively go against whoever's into this particular cult thing. Yeah, what do you mean you like that film? That film's not a cult classic. This film that I like is a cult classic. And that kind of programming goes right back to childhood, which is why I feel, anyway, this is why they structured a lot of the media around that kind of Disney model, because Disney amalgamated the methods and provided the vehicle for those methods by creating the animation studios and the whole film studio structure that he did. That gave them the vehicle to mass produce manipulative media that was geared to work with the education system and other systems like institutionalized religion to keep people in this kind of mindset where they give them an icon, they give them an idol to follow, a celebrity to worship that represents an archetype that they feel akin to, they associate with. So they clone themselves after the archetype. That creates tribal groupings that can then be manipulated against each other. So it's quite intrinsic to the system to have people thinking in a cult-like manner. The other thing I wanted to mention, and the main reason why I left that image open, is often, and this applies to cosplay really in particular, but often you know that something's become a cult, like a cult classic, when people start to fetishize it.
Yes.
When they add sex into it. Then you can guarantee, yes, it is a cult classic because it has been so assimilated into your culture or the culture that it's a classic to, that they want it to be completely part of their lives. And sex is a part of life, so they have to put sex into this thing. So we end up with this kind of culture where sexy horror, the word in itself is countering, it's counter logic. It's I can't think of the word off the top of my head now, but it's basically two opposites
oxymoron.
In one. Well, it's not really an oxymoron because
paradox.
It's paradoxical.
Yeah,
sexy usually implies something that's good in a beneficial way, procreation, making babies, good sensations, all that kind of stuff. Horror, nastiness, evil, death, and unpleasantness. And putting the two together creates a dissonant paradox that bypasses people's rational thinking, so that whatever is contained under that label gets shoved right into the subconscious. This is a technique of psychological magic that the system uses repeatedly. I use it fairly often when I try to explain to people things about, in particular, the English language, but the use of language to do that kind of manipulation.
Yeah.
I always explain it. I don't just do it to people and then, leave them with that to mess them up. I use things like that and then I explain why I've done it and how it's working kind of thing. But in this, they don't.
Yeah.
Just this one last thing.
Go ahead.
Cosplay absolutely originates from fetishism.
Yeah.
Because people wanted to dress up as their favorite, whatever, John Wayne, Johnny Weissmuller, remember the original Tarzan, and have sex with their partner or person of choice, whatever, so that they can role play or fantasize that it's, you know, their character that's having sex with them and stuff like that. So cosplay, you know, I know now it's like an adult playtime. For many people, it is just that escapism of, you know, they want to experience life as not their normal, boring self, because they're constantly told that they're normal and boring. So they want to escape. But really, it is absolutely founded on sexuality, on fetishism, on the desire to be this character and, you know, play that kind of life role.
Very, very excellent points. And yeah, the role play, because yeah, the sexual drive is the strongest drive in nature, right? It's all of us have it. So it's an easy play to you know, intoxicate people, and that duality or that inverse, the double think or double speak, you know, it's two different things at the same time. It's like it's both horror and it's both sexy, right? You see this everywhere, manifest in all their entertainment, and it's like it's paradoxical at the same time. You know, it's like, wow, this is how they're able to lure people in. And this manifests in so many elements of our society, of our entertainment, really, which again, I hate using that term because it's really programming, but to connect.
Depends if you want. I know a lot of people don't like the phrase unpack, but if you disassemble the word itself, it actually tells you exactly what it is on the tin, as it were. Entertainment, entertain. Yeah. Is a common subpart of words like contain, attain. Yeah, it's something that implies restricting. So it's entertainment. In other words, you enter it. Your mind is entering an area where you are being captured. Your mind is being captured by this thing. So the word itself it's like a warning on the label. You know, it's like the bright colors on a poisonous snake. Entertainment is letting you know that if you get into this thing, it will draw your attention in. That's its purpose. Yeah, to capture your attention and keep you focused on it.
Yeah, and it's scary because what I've been trying to illustrate to so many people is this suspended childhood type of programming, which, you know, it is, even in its infancy, or even when you are in your infancy, is highly sexual. It's like the subliminal sort of sexuality in all the Disney sort of animation, where there's, you know, vaginas and penises, but they're just so woven into the background sort of thing that you have to be paying attention to really notice them. But your subconscious, of course, is taking this all in. And so the average parent thinks, well, you know, my kid, I'm going to keep my kid's entertainment clean. I'm going to just show them Disney stuff, and I'm just going to get them the Disney Channel and, you know, and Star Wars and stuff like that, not realizing, well, that's actually the beast manifest. I mean, that is like exactly what you should be doing the opposite of. And so many of us are growing up attached to our you know, what thrilled us at whatever point. There's entertainment, as you illustrated, that we entered into a sort of level of programming that both thrilled us but captivated us. And then, you know, and then the whole thing is like, can we keep these people coming back? Can we keep them in this sort of cult? And yes, this is what you see by and large manifesting. And even in the horror film, there's just like every genre that is out there. Like there's a Game of Thrones sort of, there's all these cults around the show Game of Thrones, and around the books as well. And the cults fight against each other. And this is what many people do. I mean, we may, a lot of us that would be coming to a show like this would be maybe oblivious to it, but there are whole realms of people that are constantly channeling their energy into their entertainment, and they form their identities, and they form their communities, and even their relationships and life in these sort of cults that have been created specifically to ensnare and hold these people in. And so you see this all over your entertainment, that you are actually, that's part of the whole lure, is getting you as early as possible to engage in these things, and then carry that over into your adolescence and into your adulthood sort of thing. So that's why we see so many adults now dressing up, going to cosplay, dressing up like My Little Pony, for instance, where you have Brony, these massive expositions that, tens of thousands of people attend. And it's like adults, 40, 50 something year old men that are somehow are collecting My Little Ponies. And, it's very sad on one hand, and it's not like these are bad people. They're just people that have unfortunately been indoctrinated into these cults and are more or less oblivious to how heavy the programming has become. So it's pretty powerful how they do this. And what you said before, where they have an archetype for every type of personality, is very, very important point to point forward. It's like Marvel. If you think of the Marvel universe and you think of all the different action figures, they all kind of make up colors in the rainbow, and there's somebody for everyone. Maybe you're not Thor, maybe you're Ant-Man, right? Maybe you're not I'm trying to think of an attractive female character, Black Widow or something, right? Maybe you're the She-Hulk, right? And so, like, no matter what type of body and personality you have, they have a character there for you to embrace. One of the games I cover is called Overwatch, and again, it's another example of this, where you have a whole myriad of characters and all different types of body sizes, from midgets to, giants to huge muscular women and stuff like that. And they make all these characters to fit every type of personality that would play the game, so that you can identify as these characters. And as you play the game, the characters have the symbolism of the type of archetype character that you would have in society, like whether it be a feminist, whether it be somebody who identifies with, say, being obese, or somebody who's an extreme beta male, for instance. You would have these characters, or a homosexual, or a lesbian. They have all these different archetypes for every type of personality in the sort of myriad of the rainbow spectrum that they're programming everyone in, and so that people can identify as these characters. And then when they go to the cosplay, that's the characters that that's their avatar. We've got the Avatar movies. There's a whole series that are in production, I guess, right now. But the original Avatar movie from James Cameron is another extension of this, where, so many people are being, in my opinion, like my estimation, people are being beaten down by their entertainment, that they're actually, it's hurting them, and it's making them much less than they could be. Because if they were free and they were able to develop their mind and become critical thinkers and physically, mentally, capable people, then they would recognize what all this programming is actually doing, and they would reject it, or they would properly put it in its place, and then embrace an inner strength. And they would need to go into some other character to feel like they're important. And this, like, in many ways, when I talk about the marshmallow programming of the masses, this marshmallow sort of symbolism, right? And that is what they're trying to get people to embrace. They like what I always show, I've shown a million times, but I'm sure you've seen it, Cookie, is the meme, or the narrative that is all over Google and, the New York Times and everywhere else, is that vulnerability is strength. Right, getting people to embrace weakness, and then controlling them via that weakness. And then we've got Greta Thunberg, who is identifying her mental disabilities as superpowers, is her mental illness as a superpower. So they want you to embrace your mental illness, and then they want anybody else that comes in, any of the normies or people that are not part of your cult, they're the enemy. And again, divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer, where in every element, just like I mentioned before with the Game of Thrones, you have the people that form these groups and these cults that go every day to take part in these forums that are fans of the show. And then you have people that are fans of the books, and they hate the people that like the show, and the people that like the show hate the people that like the books. And then you could break it down on character levels and stuff like that. It's really quite astonishing. But yeah, we got to tie it back to the whole horror theme here, with what we're showing. Now, I found it interesting because there was something I wanted to show earlier. I caught James Corbett's video on the what was it called here? I've got it. It's a new type of phone product. Now, have you ever seen
the fondle slab scheme?
Yeah. I'm glad you saw that. The fondle slabs. I do have a link for it. You might have trouble trying to find it. You could try and find it if you can in a link, but I'll put a link in the chat here just in case, because I have got the article here. I wanted to talk about this because I thought it was pretty crazy. So I'll just put this up in the private chat here, and you can bring this up. Because it doesn't seem to come up in the Google searches right yet. Oh yeah, you see the first Corbett report sort of thing on that. The fondle slab. So now you have this type of phone device that you attach to your phone that allows it mimics human skin, and it allows you to squeeze and express yourself like that. The smartphone will interpret your sort of interactions with the skin, the touch, and it will speak for you based on how you react to the skin itself, right? As you see here, it's pretty crazy, right? So if you pinch it hard, maybe an angry sort of emoji might appear in your discussion, right? Or on your screen. And this is very, very interesting. So I bring up are you familiar with David Cronenberg's work?
A little bit, yeah. Not so much all of it. Yeah, I know I've seen his name on many movies. But...
Yeah, David Cronenberg is a Canadian. He's one of the best. I think he's one of the best horror directors ever. He's a master at horror. So he did the remake of The Fly, which
right,
yeah, and again, that's very, very similar in the themes. What David Cronenberg has, a lot of his themes are this organic and transhumanist sort of coming together, where Videodrome is another example, where the tech and the flesh combine, and that this is where humanity is going, into this transhumanist sort of future where tech and the flesh itself, the organic flesh and the tech, will be one, that they mix together sort of thing.
Biotech.
Yeah, and so
they did mention a film that I've been mentioning for years, Existence.
Yeah, have you seen that?
Yeah, again, it might be one I've got on VHS somewhere.
Yeah.
It epitomizes that merger between what we now commonly refer to as tech, and most people have this impression when you say tech, you mean electronic, silicon, that kind of, like a smartphone. But in that near future portrayal, that kind of technology has merged with biotechnology. So now, instead of having circuits, you have a lump of biomass that operates like a circuit.
Yes.
And the gaming devices that they use in the film connect, because they're biomatter.
Yeah.
So it's not electronics. And because it's biomatter, it can connect directly into your nervous system. So it's far more than virtual reality. It is another reality, because your brain is convinced that the signals are coming from your own senses. So you believe it 100%.
Do you know who wrote and directed Existence?
It was Cronenberg, I think.
Yes,
wasn't it?
exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe you could bring that up in an image and keep that tab still there, just to flip back and forth to show, because it's almost the same thing. It's scary how close this is to the film Existence, which Cookie is describing here. How David Cronenberg, and it's been a huge theme in his films, going back. I'm trying to think to the Brood, and certainly you could say maybe Scanners to a certain extent, but definitely a lot of his films dig into this theme, right? And that they're going to tap into our biometrics, our biochemistry sort of thing, and that'll be the way that we, like in the film they show it's very similar to the Matrix too, where it's like these it connects to your spinal cord, right? They put these orifices in. I haven't seen it in ages, so it's been like, and I probably only saw it once. So it's one of those films. It's ironic that I didn't get a chance to see it because I had a whole bunch of films that I was like, okay, I got to watch all these films to be able to host this show, be able to discuss this. But that was one of the ones I didn't get a chance to catch quite yet. But I will try to watch it again recently. I think I saw it when it came out, like, which probably, like, was it in the 90s or the early 2000s?
I think it came out about a year before Matrix. Because this and another film called, I think, Strange Days, sort of preceded the Matrix concept before the Matrix movies came out. So in like 97, 98, 99, there was a little rush of films that were all sort of about this kind of existential problem of virtual reality or existing in other dimensions kind of thing. I found some.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So very interesting. And again, yeah, with the existential sort of, like, people in this film, if I'm not mistaken, they're taking part in some sort of video game, but you don't really know. I mean, I think you could tell by watching the film that they're in a game, but it doesn't really tell you explicitly that they're in a game.
Should I give away spoilers?
Yeah, go right ahead. I'm sure.
They're kind of like a police investigation team, and they're searching for revolutionaries who are spreading their revolutionary message in the virtual worlds that are transmitted by these game devices. That blob there on the bed between them is the game device. And it's like I say, it's like a biological computer, and they plug the cables in the back of their spines and etc. Yeah. But they have to basically go around trying to trace who the leader is and who these revolutionaries are, and to try and locate them, they have to go into different worlds, because people share in the same ways like we used to back in the days of original computing. You know, people will share discs. You know, it's like, oh, have you seen this program here? Have a copy. You know, people will trade game worlds and experiences, and there's like a black market of people who make, you know, illegal game worlds and whatever. So they have to go around trying to figure out where these people are. But in doing so, as the story unfolds, you realize that they don't even know if they're actually in reality or whether they're still playing a game. Yeah, because each time they log into a game world, the game world is just like reality. So it is so immersive, they're not sure if they've actually unplugged themselves or whether they're still in another game world somewhere and just believe they've unplugged themselves.
And that gets into the existential sort of thing where it's like we're all kind of playing roles in reality anyways. So in ways we are already part of you know, some sort of existential.
It's very similar to Philip K. Dick kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's that question of what does it mean to be consciously sentient, and how do you know what reality is, and are you still actually in reality, or is this just some kind of illusion? Yeah,
exactly. And then again too, with the they like to throw this meme out a lot that we're in some sort of either holographic or computer simulation sort of thing. And the Matrix, of course, delves massively into that. That would be the one that most people would be familiar with, but definitely Cronenberg is one of the definitely more interesting directors and writers, because he pretty much writes all his films. He's got another film called Dead Ringers too, which is really interesting. It's all dealing with reproductive, women and reproductive systems and the horror of birth and not giving birth and stuff like that. Really interesting themes that he throws in with The Fly, the remake, which is one of the best horror films I think of all time. It's right up there with The Thing, and it's just so amazingly well done, and it's a horrific sort of transformation. It does tap into the transhumanism as well in The Fly, especially in the end there, where he kind of merges the human merges with the insect, merges with the machine. When his final iteration, when he tries to free himself of, so if people aren't familiar, I'm sure most people know about the movie The Fly, if not the original one that from the 1950s with Vincent Price, but the much superior David Cronenberg version of The Fly. And he says Cronenberg said it's more about aging, and that how, we can't, like, it's one of the horrors that every organic human, or at least human beings, you'd think animals probably don't sit around thinking about how they're getting older. Maybe they do, I don't know. But with human beings, it's an inherent fear that, you start losing hair, you start losing teeth, you start, and so with The Fly, there is a scientist played by Jeff Goldblum who is developing a method of teleportation, and he builds these pods in which he can teleport unorganic material, but he wants to, so he's experimenting heavily trying to figure out, and he's using animals, and he's getting all these, inside out baboons and stuff like that. It's pretty gory stuff. Really one of the most effective horror films I think of that's ever been made. And there's a really strong love theme in the film with the two lead actors who are really strong, Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum. But yeah, he goes through the teleportation one night because he's drunk and he's pissed off at the Gina Davis character, and he doesn't realize a little fly got into the pod, so he got the teleporter got confused and decided to splice their genes together, and he slowly starts to change into some sort of half human, half insect, and a very interesting with the insect sort of mindset that is depicted in the film. And he's struggling throughout the film, kind of Kafkaesque, if you will, right? He's struggling in the film to hold on to his humanity, where his insect sort of brain wants to just do what it wants to do, right? Like it doesn't want, there's no compromise. And he says he wants to be the first insect sort of politician, right? To be a thinking insect, an insect that's not just brutal sort of thing. There's an interesting scene. I don't know if you ever saw the scene that they it's on YouTube, and it's a scene that was cut from the film in which he basically merges a cat with a baboon. Have you ever seen that clip?
No, I don't think so.
Oh my God. It's so disturbing. And you know, it definitely would have made the film a few shades darker. That's it. Yeah, the baboon cat. And but they removed it because they thought at that point, too many people are animal lovers, and they thought at that point that the audience would lose sympathy with the main character, and they didn't want the audience to lose sympathy with him, because that's why you invest so heavily in that film, because you're so sympathetic to the lead character. You know, he's such a nice guy, he's funny, he's charismatic, you know, and you're rooting for him, sort of thing, as he starts to disintegrate. But yeah, very excellent film.
Similar to Frankenstein,
Yes.
you end up sympathizing with the monster, and you want him to survive and be okay and, you know, sort the situation out. But of course, he descends into absolute monstrosity and starts killing everyone.
Well, I think with Frankenstein, it's interesting because I've seen several different versions of the film, and you know, the original is always the best. You know, I think The Bride of Frankenstein is an excellent sort of follow-up too. It's more fun. But the original Frankenstein, there was one which was done, I believe, in the 80s, and it was called The Bride. And I thought that was actually pretty good, because the Frankenstein that was depicted in that was, you were much more sympathetic towards him, right? Like that he actually was a decent character. If he was given a chance, he would have been. There was also the one with Robert De Niro, which kind of bombed and not well received, but Robert De Niro's depiction of Frankenstein was you would more sympathize with the Frankenstein monster being created from the egocentric, ambitious, sort of mad scientist, if you will. But that, yeah, the creation of new life, which again, we're well into that paradigm. So when it comes to not just maybe resurrecting the dead, because you see the resurrection of the dead, the zombie theme is I mean, I don't have to say it, right? You can't avoid it. It's everywhere, right? The zombie movies over the past couple decades have definitely become the main theme of horror films. And if you go back, I did this a few years back on one of the Halloween shows where we went through the decades. And you know how in the 1950s, for instance, it was aliens, right? And then I think if you go back, there was the vampire era, probably Bela Lugosi and the original Dracula and Wolfman. You had like the human transformations, sort of.
I'd also argue that those were cultural horror stories.
Yes.
In the 50s, with the atomic age, and after the war and all that kind of stuff, and nuclear weapons being invented, people became obsessed with outer space. You had the beginnings of the UFO phenomena. So yeah, it was a main topic for a lot of the horror and sci-fi horror. So a lot of it was to do with alien invasions, like the one from Mars, the invaders from Mars, and the Forbidden Planet, which was considered somewhat of a horror film. It was quite shocking when it first came out. But then it did I think they sort of played out that theme, and they went back to traditional cultural horror stories. So you had like the werewolves and vampires and ghosts and demonic possession. And then it starts to become more about possession in the 90s.
The 70s, when you think of the 70s, you think The Exorcist, The Omen, right? You think of the satanic possession, the satanic panic, the satanic possession type movies. And again, these themes of losing control, right? Of demonic possession. I mean, losing control in one way or another of your bodily and your mind at the same time, which I don't know, you can argue which is scarier, sort of thing. That's a heavy Cronenberg theme too. Is just, and again with The Fly, that kind of taps into that, like where you're losing control of your body, and your body's decaying or it's changing and you can't stop it, sort of thing. But yeah, it's very, very interesting how these themes have, because horror is a good barometer of seeing how much of this type of entertainment is manifesting. And I think the zombie theme has been so strong for the past 2 decades, for good reason. They're pushing the cannibalism, for instance. And you think of, well, cannibalism. Well, what do you think of? I mean, the first thing I would think of when it comes to horror and cannibalism would be Hannibal Lecter, right? The Silence of the Lambs, and then all the spinoffs and TV shows that came out of that particular one. You'd also think of films like Cannibal Holocaust. Have you ever seen that one, by the way?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, it's interesting too with that particular film, because the makers of the film were arrested in Italy, if I'm not mistaken, because they thought it was a snuff film, that it was so effectively done, these scenes, and they actually kill animals. I remember the scene with the turtle where they cut open the turtle. It's really brutal to watch. But yet this type of stuff is done every day, right? And it's just, we don't see it because we're so detached. Again, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one, which in my mind is one of the most effective horror films that's ever been done. And the theme of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you could say it's a heavy New World Order film in the sense that it's almost a vegetarian film if you break it down, because it's cannibals who basically treat humans like cattle. And it's so shocking because it's like, well, how could like that scene there with Leatherface when he puts the girl on the hook, which I think is one of the most just terrifying scenes in horror history, where she's stuck on a meat hook, left to hang and slowly die while her boyfriend is being chopped up with a chainsaw on the table. It's like, that doesn't scare you, that doesn't freak you out, nothing will, sort of thing. But yeah, go ahead.
It's been quite a while since I've seen that, but I seem to remember that there's no music during most of those scenes, and that again makes the horror comes out of that effect of these supposed people, Leatherface and his family, are so lacking any emotional connection to the people that they're killing. So, as far as I remember, there's no music in those parts.
Yeah, there's no music in those parts, but there is music, like in the opening scene when they're driving. They pick up one of the family members, and he's a hitchhiker, and he's facially disfigured and really really out there sort of thing. And he starts doing a bizarre ritual in the car where he's slicing his hand open with a razor blade, or in the van, and they're all watching. And then he takes a photo and rips it up and then puts gunpowder on it and does this bizarre little ritual and burns it and freaks out the people. Yeah, I mean, I don't have to tell horror fans about how powerful of a horror film the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. It's one of the most legendary horror films that is out there, for very good reason. If you want a really terrifying sort of horror film, definitely go and check that one out. Not for the squeamish, and there's very little blood, and it goes to show you again with horror films, a lot of horror film directors have no clue. I would say Eli Roth is one of the worst out there when you talk about clueless people that don't understand what real horror is. Like it's more the unknown. It's what you can't see that really scares you. And Jaws, interestingly enough, which again, in my opinion, Jaws is one of the quintessential horror films of the 1970s. It's Steven Spielberg's best film. One of the reasons why Jaws works so well, aside from the great tension created by the music and the way it's shot and the acting, and I mean, a lot of the script is really sharp. It just flows so well. But Jaws, you don't see the shark until the very end. I mean, you see just the dorsal fin and stuff like that, right? You don't really, and that's that's like Lovecraftian sort of tactic that more astute sort of directors will use, where you don't want to show the boogeyman too quickly, or you want to wait till the end. You want to build up, ratchet up that suspense sort of thing to the nth degree.
But the older films, especially some of the old black and white movies, they were doing it partly because obviously production costs and special effects requirements and stuff, but they would more often give you just the silhouette or the shadow of a creature. You'd never see the creature. Right until the very last few frames of the film, sort of thing, the last 10 minutes of the movie, and then you actually get to see the terrible rubber mask special effects. But before you're shown that, the suspense that is created is far more horrific. Because your own imagination is more fertile than what they can represent on the screen a lot of the time, especially when you're talking about horror effect or eliciting that kind of terror effect. Your own fears will emerge. They just create the fertile field to draw it out.
Well, so that's what it is, because it's your fears that make the horror film scary. It's not the horror film itself. If it taps into your fears, then it works, right? And the most effective horror films are the ones that are so good at tapping into our latent sort of fears, the things that are deep in our mind that we don't want to see or have to deal with.
A lot of the time, especially in zombie movies, they've done this for decades. It's sort of been part of the genre. It relies on gore. And this now, it's like I've tried watching some of the Walking Dead, or the last season of the Walking Dead, and it's just pathetic. I really find it pathetic that they're still, other than, I know we've spoken about it before, and you've done multiple videos talking about this idea. I know they're just perpetuating it because it's a propaganda vehicle. It's there to push ideas into the public's mind. But if you were a genuine horror fan, especially of the zombie kind of style of horror movie, it's awful. Apart from the quality special effects, just because it's got the budget to do that. but the actual writing in it it's pathetic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but zombie movies rely on gore more than anything.
Well, you know,
And
like
it's something that I know for some people that it might connect in the sense of they don't see this kind of stuff in their daily life, and it's to do with that disconnect between people and where their food comes from primarily.
Yeah.
So they don't see the blood and guts of the factory abattoir that's processing cows all day long.
Yes,
But
exactly.
this kind of stuff frightens some people in that way. But to me, it's the most horrific or the most effective horror movies are the ones that, like you say, they play on your own fears, and it doesn't necessarily require any gory effects to make you terrified.
Yeah.
It can be something quite simplistic. Like I remember from when I was a kid and I watched Children of the Corn. And that scared me, just the idea of all these crazy little kids.
That's an interesting one to bring up. Interesting. I didn't think of it before when I was prepping for the show, but Children of the Corn. Yeah. I mean, you have, first of all, you have a form of euthanasia. So you have a cult, you have a bunch of children that take over a small sort of town, and they kill everyone over 18. And it's brutal. I mean, that's the most brutal scene in the whole film when they take over the city and or the town. It's a small little town in Iowa or something like that. And they are all part of some sort of cult, satanic, if you will, type cult. I remember the book too by Stephen King. Well, it was like 12 pages or something, right? It's a typical Stephen King. You know, anything he writes gets made into a feature-length film, even if it's like 2 pages or something, right? But yeah, the idea of the youth killing off all the elderly, and this is a big theme in a lot of films these days, and I think this is one of the things that you're going to see more and more as we go forward, this divide between the youth. I know they rebooted Pet Sematary. I don't think I've seen the new one, but the original one, or the original film, which is another Stephen King book. And Stephen King is a very interesting character, in that he's very anti-Christian, because of his upbringing.
So that's very telling that we're in the search term for Children of the Corn. Look who turns up as part of the images.
Greta. Yeah. In fact, you could say Greta is kind of like the Isaac character there. Yeah. The young superstar child who's leading the massive cult. Yeah. And whatever he says is the word, sort of thing, and everybody has to listen to him, because he who walks behind the rows. And they have their blue man on the cross there, which is the police. The policeman was the only guy that tried to stand up to them, and he becomes the representation, I guess, of what happens to. But yeah, they kill off, and again, that theme, that euthanasia theme. There's a lot of films. Logan's Run, probably one of the better ones. The British sci-fi, not a horror film, but somewhat horrific, and it's, that we're gonna just kill off people. You see the euthanasia theme massively these days in the media. I'm going to be doing videos on this coming up because it just keeps popping up. I mean, like every day. If you just do a search on Google for euthanasia, you'll see stories popping up, normalizing it, along with the cannibalism and, the Soylent Green sort of, I guess you could say to a certain extent, predictive programming that they're witnessing. The bugs, eating the bugs. Very interesting how all the films kind of, predictively program this stuff, and then it manifests, and next thing you know, there's articles, should we eat should we eat old people? And then you have films.
Should we kill people at the age of 72?
Yeah. So did you see the film that recently depicted that?
No,
Midsummer?
I've still been avoiding it because I've always liked the movie Wicker Man.
Yeah.
I've watched it multiple times, and I think it defines that kind of storyline very well. I don't want to look at a modern propaganda version of the same kind of idea that's just dripping with modern propaganda that I know I'll just be fed up.
I think you would be pleasantly surprised that the director, the Ari Aster character, who's a bagel, but he's actually a very, very talented filmmaker and very effective. He's got 2 films under his belt, and they're 2 of the best horror films of the past decade, Hereditary and Midsummer. And I think he was heavily influenced by The Wicker Man. I think there's multiple articles that talk about that as well. So I think it's actually a really good companion piece to the original Wicker Man. I mean, never seen the Nicolas Cage one, never will.
But I saw it once and I laughed hysterically.
Yeah, not the bees. That's the only part I know. But The Wicker Man, which is such a unique, classic British horror film set in Scotland. Terrific cast. Again, another excellent horror film that doesn't necessarily have to be categorized as a horror film, because it's in many ways it's kind of a musical, right? But it's such a good musical. It's not one of these horrible musicals where everybody just starts dancing like it's Bollywood, or it's a musical that incorporates music that is live happening in the film, and it just seamlessly weaves it into the story. But yeah, I think The Wicker Man is one of the best horror films of all time, and definitely one of the top horror films of the 1970s. And again, that's dealing with pagan cults. And you're seeing a lot of this, and again, people will think that paganism is evil and all that, but it's just a big, huge part of the old style type of religions that have existed for thousands and thousands of years. It doesn't necessarily have to be satanic or evil. It's just a completely different.
It's a problematic word, or it's become a problematic word, because so many people just take a fairly standardized definition of what it means and think that it applies to everything that is not one of the Judeo-Christian religions.
Yeah.
So if it's not from the Abrahamic root, it's pagan.
Yeah.
And that means somebody who worshipped sunflowers could be called pagan, and somebody who sacrificed babies and drank their blood can be called pagan. So saying all pagans are evil is just foolishness.
Yeah, of course. And Christianity has adopted massive amounts of pagan, especially when it comes to Easter and the equinoxes and all that,
and
Halloween. Yeah. So many of these. So yeah, but there is a tendency amongst the truthers sort of community to look upon anything paganism as satanic, but that's a very bad simplification.
It's inaccurate. It is.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say Midsummer is a really good film. Like, it's a really effective horror film that does not employ any of the horror tropes of jump scares and stuff like that. It builds up characters really well, and the Swedish sort of cult is very, very interesting. The artwork alone makes it worth the ticket, right? Like to see the whole sort of town and the way it's set up, it's really, in my opinion, it's a classic horror film. Now I know it comes from it comes from them, so always take that into mind when you're watching these films. But I would definitely recommend Midsummer if you want to see, and there are very, very interesting elements woven into that film, including feminism, sort of the heavy feminist sort of an anti-patriarchal depiction of this Swedish cult. They have instances where the Mayflower Queen, I won't give anything away from the film, but she is lamenting because she's found out her boyfriend, has cheated on her, and she is sobbing, and all the women around her are doing the exact same thing. And it's so reminiscent of these feminist gatherings at these Trump rallies. Like it can't be, and it's not coincidental. In other words, it's depicting this high level of programming that many of women are being programmed into, this hive mind. And I think I did a video, if I'm not mistaken, on covering not just Midsummer, but some of the other films dealing with that hive mind programming, because much of what is depicted in Midsummer is that hive mind. The stupa there, which is the ritual of killing off the seniors, or they sacrifice themselves basically. And that's a very powerful scene in the film. And that's the interesting part, because that's getting into the euthanasia, where it's like the elderly off themselves when they reach the age of 72 by, and this is true. This is it's well documented in Swedish pagan cultures and other cultures around the world, that this type of ritual. I know with Inuits, it was common for them to go off and feed themselves to the polar bears, kind of thing, as a way of like, once you pass that point where you're no longer able to function and do the basic things in society, you give up but this is all feeds into the Agenda 21 narrative and what we're seeing. So I think Midsummer is a very important film, because it is pushing for a balance. Like the cult in the Swedish cult in this are in harmony with their nature. And a lot of people come away from the film saying, like, yeah, I wouldn't mind living like that. In fact, yeah, I don't want to give anything away about the film, but it could be highly debated that it is a favorable. You could say that about Wicker Man too. I mean, you could, I know Wicker Man. Okay. So Wicker Man, I saw Wicker Man on a VHS cassette. It was in Vancouver. It was at some really obscure video store in a little town, and there was a very interesting elderly couple that ran the video store, and they were like, they saw me looking at Wicker Man. They're like, wow, Wicker Man, that's a very interesting film. I definitely recommend that one. You go. I'd never heard of it before. I took it home and I was blown away, like from the moment that I put it on. And it was one of those films that I went around and I had all my friends and family and all that. I said, you have to watch this. You have to watch this. You have to see this. And it's like my brother's favorite movie because I forced him to watch it, and he just loved it. And I think to an extent, one of the reasons why a lot of us would love a film like that is that you see, a sort of totally different lifestyle, that these people are living totally against the grain in a different, and celebrating like the open sexuality and animalism and stuff like that, right? Embracing with nature, which is again, these are heavy Agenda 21 themes. In fact, you could say that there's a certain amount of ecosexuality being depicted in The Wicker Man. You've got a woman, like, naked women, like sobbing, grabbing a tree and stuff like that, or like you see these themes popping up more and more these days, and I think The Wicker Man was well ahead of its time. It'll never be bettered. There's no point never remaking it.
This partly what I was thinking when I kept this. Well, I looked for this sort of image, or try and find one of these images, because I thought it relates very well to what we were talking about earlier about the cosplay. Yeah, in Wicker Man and in pagan traditions, really they are about representing the animal totems or the animal archetypes within nature, things like that. Some of them are archetypal concepts as well, like the hobby horse and stuff like that. They're not actual animals, but most of them, the majority of them, are all animals. And it's a way of, and I'm talking about it from the point of view of, you don't descend into the craziness of sacrificing people and animals and using blood magic and that kind of stuff, because that's where I think it goes wrong. That's where it's been corrupted and turned into something nasty. But this is about people connecting with the natural surroundings, the natural environment that they are part of, that we are part of. So they take on these escapism roles of pretending to be an animal that's part of their culture. So there's foxes and bulls and goats. And the salmon of knowledge is a classic Gaelic, as far as I remember, it originates from the Gaelic sort of tale of the salmon of knowledge. But this is, in a way, it's cosplay, because people were acting out roles of something that they're not normally in their everyday lives. But at the same time, rather than putting that energy into a icon of a celebrity or a character from fiction, a horror character or whatever, they're acknowledging the elements of nature, the animals within the nature around them, that is part of their life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was a thing that stood out to me. So it's an element of where an old tradition has become a new tradition that now we call cosplay, and it's been appropriated in such a way that they've got rid of the original sort of elements, the natural elements that people used to acknowledge, and they've replaced them with fake, constructed illusions of something that, you know, is a celebrity figure or a fictional character from a book.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, and The Wicker Man, I don't think it's a negative portrayal of Christianity either.
No.
Because you could argue at the end of the film that the police sergeant there, you know, he never wavered from his faith. And so in a way, there's that showdown next year, it will be you, you know, and he points to just fantastic acting too from the you know, Christopher Lee and Edward Woodward, just amazing actors. But
I'm not sure if I might have said this to you before when we may have chatted about it before, but over the years I've come to interpret that role that's played by Edward Woodward's character, the policeman. He represents the Christ self.
Yep.
And the whole story arc is about him, as you say, sticking to his faith, sticking to what he feels is his knowledge of reality that says there is this one creator and I follow that creator. And in doing so, he has to be sacrificed.
Yeah.
So just like Christ is put on the cross, in this version of the story, he's burnt alive in the Wicker Man. But it's basically the same archetypal play going through, even the fact that he gets tempted by carnal desires. You know, they send the woman in to try and tempt him away from his path, but he sticks to his path of righteousness and carries through to the point where he has to be sacrificed.
Yeah. So, that's why the film is so interesting, because it can be analyzed in so many different ways, and it's not like, I'd say the movie.
It's not a celebration of brutal paganism.
It's a more of a fair sort of look into it. It's interesting, the backstory to Lord Summerisle, and you know how he was like some sort of botanist who you know figured that the currents and stuff and the particular, but the way that you know he bought the island and brought his own people, and then decided that he was going to do away with the Christian sort of way of thinking and let his people embrace the old pagan sort of way of life, and that they would be more maybe more of a cult, maybe easier to contain, maybe easier to control in a way. Because again, organized religion is a cult as well, right? It's very cultish in its methods, and so I think it's like, I couldn't recommend it highly enough, even if you are Christian, because even as we said, the character, the police sergeant in it, he does remain faithful to the very end. He never breaks his vows. He never breaks his code, and you know, and so he could be at the end, in a way, the reason why they sacrifice him is because he's so pure, because they believe that his purity and his devotion is what makes him a worthy sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not as black and white as some people might want to depict it. But yeah, just a brilliant horror film. Highly recommended. I think you should definitely watch Midsummer. I think you'll appreciate it, even though you know the sources might be very evil where it comes from. I found the movie The Witch. Have you seen that one?
I think so. Yeah.
Again, it's A24 Studios is they're chalking out these horror films. They got a new one out called The Lighthouse, which I'm very interested in, which is it's a 2-actor thing. It's William Dafoe.
I haven't seen this one, so no.
Oh yeah, this one is very disturbing film, and I believe it's actually made by Satanists. It's a very negative portrayal of Puritanism and Christianity in the film, and but it's an extremely effective horror film. Like when you talk atmosphere, like for me, like if we're just going to stop for a second and say what's an effective horror film, I would say The Witch is a very effective horror film because it the way that it weaves the atmosphere and it taps into a lot of the fears that all of us have, you know, whether you're a father or mother or just a child or whatever you might be. You know, this film does a really powerful sort of it creates a very creepy, disturbing atmosphere. But I think it's a very negative portrayal of Christianity. I think it's like the people behind it are have an issue. They have an agenda, sort of thing, to glamorize Satanism and depict Christianity as some form of dogmatism, just, you know, mind control and cultism. It's very ironic in the same way, because it's like,
and it's a simplification. In both directions, they do this. You know, I was talking about earlier, get people into a cult mentality and set them against each other.
Yes.
Christianity, any organized religion, can be dogmatic.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean there's no truth to it. That doesn't mean there's no good benefit to it. It's just, if it's nothing but dogma, then that is caustic. You know, that stifles people.
It's also a deconstruction of the family. So maybe that's something to talk about as well with a lot of these films. Hereditary, which is another, I would say, another excellent horror film, a very recent one. Again, it's the same director as Midsummer. This guy knows his stuff. Like, this is a guy that, you know, like you and me, Cookie, we've grown up appreciating what you know, horror classics for being able to create great atmosphere and just making, you know, not committing all the tropes and cliches of horrors, the jump scares and stuff like that. But Hereditary is a very, very disturbing film, again dealing with cults, Satanism, but also kind of a metaphor for the deconstruction and the destruction of the modern family. And then even bringing in the sort of transgender agenda in that. But this is another film that's a cut above in terms of acting and story writing and just atmosphere. It really pulls it off well. Very, very disturbing film. Highly satanic. And again, you know, with these horror films, you have to pay in mind that they are powerful. There's nothing more powerful when it comes to like cinema at this point in time, before we get into the whole virtual reality where you'll be able to play roles in movies and stuff like that. That's going to be the next big thing that comes down the pipe. Or with what's depicted in Black Mirror, where you have in films like Existence, like we mentioned before, where the realm virtual reality becomes reality. You don't even know what it is at a certain point, like where and Black Mirror is depicting this a lot, where people are putting in, they're entering a virtual world in their brain, like they're using brain chips and stuff like that to take part in video games and in other things, right? Role play and stuff like that. I think that's where we're going to be in no time. And I think one of the horrors of what we're all going to face, or many of us are going to face, that especially those that are most massively programmed, I think it's already to a certain extent there, is that people will not be able to differentiate reality from virtual reality, or that the two will become so blurred that, and it's already in many ways. I mean, so many people have this belief.
So I was just going to shout fake news then.
Yeah, like fake news, for instance. Like, you know, you believe that there's al-Baghdadis and characters, and there's bombs going off maybe in your cities, and you know, there's bad white supremacists, and some of it might be true, and a lot of it is just make-believe. But at the same time, people balance their sort of beliefs and their political system and their ideology on what they perceive to be real around them. And if a lot of that is just manufactured, well, then are you really living in reality? Do you really even know what reality is? And so in many ways, the work that we do on our shows and our channels kind of breaks through that barrier and tries to say to folks, well, wait a second, maybe your reality that your sort of comfort zone that you have been whether left or Democrat, Republican, whatever, right? Wherever you have ended up on the political sphere, maybe that is a massive sort of manipulation, and that you're not really aware of what reality is, that much of your reality is just manufactured. So I think that horror films do a good job, or some of them can do a very good job illustrating that point, that people may not be able to differentiate reality from virtual reality, or from completely fantasy itself, sort of thing. So that's another one I would say. I think you would appreciate that film, Hereditary, that you're showing up on the screen here, for just the artistic sort of atmospheric vision of the director himself, who clearly has been watching a lot of very classic horror films and has been heavily influenced by them. The studio A24 is the one that's chalking out all these films. So I'd say A24 right now are probably producing the best, most effective horror films. Doesn't mean that they're not entirely New World Order and evil in their intent, but they're very, very effective films that are definitely tapping into much of our fears. If you allow yourself to venture into these films, you're probably going to be, the whole deconstruction of the family dealing with Hereditary is very, very disturbing.
It's what made me notice, when you said that earlier, made me notice this stand out, using an image from the film as a Happy Mother's Day card, and at the same time, obviously I'm just looking at images here, but looking at the link headline, supposedly a cinema accidentally played this horror movie instead of playing Peter Rabbit.
Oh, yeah, it's it. I love that.
Peter Rabbit is classically a storyline aimed at younger children, and is all about families and family life.
Yeah.
So, accidental.
Yeah, exactly. I think I recall that story too, and it's like, how long before people in this theater started to realize, because the film takes a real long time to unfold. Like, how long before you begin to realize that you're actually watching. That's happened to me before. You ever done that, where you've gone with your buddies and stuff? Maybe you're late and you get into the theater and you're sitting down, and the previews go on, and maybe you're watching the film, and then after about 5 minutes, you're like, are we in the right theater?
I think the last time I went to the cinema was about 2003.
Uh-huh. Wow.
So no, I don't think I've ever done that. I've sneaked into the pictures when I was a kid.
I used to do that all the time.
Yeah.
We would go from one film to another. We'd watch 3 in a day, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Pay for one. One person to pay and open the back door. But actually, one of the horror themes that I think we should talk about is the Lost in the Woods type theme, which I think a lot of films tie into, because I think this is a big Agenda 21 theme. When you see what's happening in California, British Columbia, these wildfires, and you see a lot of videos that go viral dealing with wildlife and wildlife attacks, right? When bears attack, or people getting lost in the woods, lost in the desert. It's a big theme that pops up in CNN and all your Disney media. And so a lot of the films, Blair Witch, probably a lot of people are familiar with that one, is a great example. I saw one called The Ritual, which is it's very similar to the Blair Witch, in which it's, again, a bunch of guys going up into the woods, I think I don't know if it was Norway or Sweden, somewhere in Scandinavia. And then they lose themselves. And then next thing you know, they're being terrorized by some entity, right? Some demonic sort of entity. And I would wager that a lot of these films with this theme, coupled with, what you see with the wildfires and a lot of the ecological sort of disasters, the whether entirely organic or aided and abetted, the massive hurricanes, tornadoes and stuff like that. Just looking at the maps of Agenda 21, the whole objectives to move people into massive city centers and away from coastal and rivers and forest and mountains and stuff like that. I think a lot of these films are actually designed with this sort of fear of nature, like that the you should be afraid of the woods sort of thing. Not that you shouldn't in a sense, because if you're going into the real woods sort of thing, like if you're in the woods, like I spent a lot of time in British Columbia and I would run into bears fairly frequently, but it was never a bad situation sort of thing. But still, you have to keep your wits about you because you're in the woods and there are dangerous things that could eat you sort of thing. But I think there's a lot of these films that have been coming out over the years. There's one called the Descent. Are you familiar with that one?
Is it fairly old, several years old? Rings a bell.
Maybe 2005-ish.
Yeah.
You could put that in for a search, The Descent. Very interesting because it's a feminist. It's a group of women that decide to go cave, exploring caves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And very interesting themes in that. But again, it's another one of these things where you have people getting lost in nature and going mad, basically, right? And this fear. So if we think about the modern sort of average youth these days who has a smartphone, right? Who is hooked up to their Black Mirror 24/7 social media. Most people these days, not when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I was in the mud, building the tree forts, at the swamp, catching the fish, the bullfrogs, the salamanders, the whole 9 yards, doing everything that a typical boy would do with access to nature. These days, kids are growing up in a much more sterile environment where, you have cleaning products that wipe out 99.9% of germs. And, this chemical sort of cleanliness that we exist in, which is, is definitely contributing to a lot of the mental disorders and obesity and stuff like that, dealing with kids. But if we think about the average kid today, actually is probably growing up so reliant on their devices that they cannot envision a world of, separating themselves from the tech and the safe urban sort of settings that they're accustomed to, the easy access and convenience of everything. And so I think a lot of these films are part of a form of predictive programming to make people fear nature. I mean, you want to respect nature, and obviously the people that run this new world order are huge. I don't have to tell anybody that are obsessed with establishing a sort of balance, right? They want to depopulate the planet. They want to take control of human reproduction, and then they want to have us all worship. They want a one world religion, and really it's a worship of nature and science and man sort of thing that they want us to embrace. So I think a lot of these films are depicting this, or at least coding this sort of fear of nature and wilderness and the unknown. And so, like Lost in the Woods type of films, Blair Witch Project, which I'm sure, have you seen that one?
Yes.
Yeah. So that, right? Like it's like that fear of that. That's why I mentioned the movie The Ritual before, because it was like very, very similar, where it's instead of it. Well, actually, the Blair Witch was a trio, if I'm not mistaken. It was a guy and a girl, but it was a girl, kind of a matriarchal figure that was kind of leading the guys sort of around. But you're depicting again and again in these films. Another great one is Deliverance.
Oh yeah.
You've seen that one, of course, right? And Deliverance is not technically, I don't know if you'd technically call it a horror film, but it certainly is very horrific. If people that are listening to this haven't seen the 1970s Deliverance film, excellent film that is very effective on many levels. And again, it's a bunch of guys. But if you go back those generations, you look at the characters involved, and you have the John Voight character and you have the Burt Reynolds character. So you have two fairly physically capable characters. You have the Burt Reynolds character, who is the alpha male, and he is like really fit and strong. And then you have the kind of alpha male wannabe character, but still fit and fairly capable, who is John Voight. And then you have the two softer males. You have the pudgy sort of, Ned Beatty character, who is the one that ends up getting raped by the inbred sort of mountain men, if you will, right? And that's like one of the most classic scenes in horror history, really. Squeal like a pig. There they are. So again, if you were to move that forward, like for instance, what the film that I mentioned before, which was called The Ritual, which had four men as well venturing into nature, but these four men that they depict in The Ritual were far more of the Ned Beatty type character, right? Like not at all capable, not at all really nature outdoorsman, and far more indicative of the type of current sort of male that is far more comfortable in a Starbucks with a smartphone than out in the woods, right? Having to fend for himself or make a fire or make shelter and stuff like that. And so, like, yeah, we see with Deliverance, you could argue that Deliverance is one of those films that like just scares you about nature. Like, don't,
It scares city folk.
Yes.
Because I've got to say, when I watched Blair Witch Project, I laughed all the way through. Because to me, it was a really good example of what you were describing earlier, where they're playing on the fears of I'll say modern generation.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit of a loose label, but they're playing on the fears of a modern generation who, in general, don't have much knowledge or skills at being in the outdoors.
Yes.
So they don't know how to make a fire. They don't know how to find their way through some woods if they realise that they've left the path and they don't know where they are. They're lost, basically, because they make so many simple, stupid mistakes in that movie. I was just laughing at it all the way through. It's like, how is this a horror film? This is a film about stupidity.
Yes.
This should be shown in schools to kids to show them this is what you don't do when you're out in the wilderness, because you'll end up lost and fall down a hole and do something silly to yourself.
Yeah.
Deliverance doesn't really do that. The guys are meant to be capable. That's why they're going out in the wilderness, to go hunting, so they know what they're doing. So it's not so much that they're lost in the woods. It's more about the losing themselves to the kind of extreme elements of humanity. Because again, like you mentioned earlier as well, it's the people that are the scary thing, not the nature. It's not like they're afraid and they're being hunted by some monster crocodile or something. No, it's the people.
Well, there are examples of that thing. But and I thought of one film. I can't recall the name of it, but it was a highly acclaimed film, and maybe this will ring a bell with you or some of the people that are listening in the chat, which is a film about a guy that just one day, he's a young guy, and he just decides, you know what, he just rips up his credit cards and gets in his car and just takes off, right? And basically, and then he ends up in Mexico, and then in the end he ends up in Alaska, and I can't remember the name of the film. And
something
it had
wilderness, Into the Wilderness.
Yeah, Into the Wild or Into the Wilderness. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Somebody will be able to confirm that for sure. And I think and it's a really well done film, well acted, and you buy into the spirit of the character, because the character is like a carefree, he's a likable guy. He rejects the whole, gotta have a job and gotta do this, gotta do that, go through all the steps, go to college, and he just decides, you know what, I'm gonna, that's Into the Wild. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. So, based on a true story, whatever, right? But the thing about this story that is just incredible is how he ends up, right? Because he dies. I don't care about spoiling this. I mean, if you haven't seen it, whatever.
It's quite an old film. So.
Yeah. yeah, you buy into the whole character, so you're on this adventure with him, and it's quite exciting because he's going, he's in Mexico, and then he's on a kayak and he's going down the Colorado River, right? And he's thrilled, and you're going around the very well shot, beautiful scenery and stuff like that.
Lots of nice scenery.
Yeah, you buy into the character, and then he ends up in Alaska, and he finds an old school bus or whatever, right, that's abandoned, and he decides that's going to be his camp, and he's just going to live there. And yet he's completely unprepared for everything. Like he kills a moose, but he has no real skill, and he has no knowledge in how to properly to take the thing apart and process it, sort of thing. So it all gets infested with maggots, and then he ends up eating. He thinks he eats an edible plant, but it turns out to be a toxic plant, and he eats a whole bunch of it, and then he just basically slowly dies alone, and he's only like a couple kilometers away from like a major highway or something, but he can't get there because the water level's risen on the river that he crossed. And it's like, again, when I watched that film, I thought, oh, here we go, Agenda 21 again. That's exactly what I was thinking, because it was another thing that was like, no, you can't live in nature. No, nature is brutal. Nature will kill you. You're much better. So like, you buy into the whole freedom of the character and the freedom that exists, but then he ends up in a terrible state. He ends up dead. And so that's the way I kind of interpreted that film, as like a thing that lures you in with the romance of freedom and nature, but really in the end, it's reinforcing that you need to, you need the state. You need to do what you pay your carbon taxes. You got to work your 9-to-5 job. You got to, work in that, hopefully get that suburban home sort of thing. So I found the film deceiving in that way. And I thought it was interesting that it was Eddie Vedder that did the music for it, because Eddie Vedder is a major league New World Order shill, Agenda 21, pushing disarmament, pushing gun control, all these things. So I find films like that, and that's not a horror film, but I thought when you were discussing that before, I was thinking of that, and it does fit into the whole narrative of these Lost in the Woods type films. There's one called The Prophecy.
Just to mention something as well, I think it's playing on that same psychological element, because the living in the camper bus, or the old bus that he finds, that to me, that represented him not actually really being able to let go. Because even though he's right out in the wilderness, I mean, if anything, the camper thing the bus would be all right as a temporary shelter, but as a long-term shelter, it's impractical. It'd be difficult to heat. It's just not a good idea.
It's not a good idea to go and try to live in Alaska off the grid with no experience. Like,
but that's why I say it sort of represents an element of the system he just doesn't seem to be able to truly let go of. And I think that is where it sort of becomes a horror movie, because the writer is teasing you with this concept of true freedom. And this guy just goes off into the wilderness, but he can't actually really ever let go. So therefore, it's his demise. The fact that he couldn't let go is causing his own demise.
Inevitable, in other words, that was going to be his fate. And it's ironic, because if you compare and contrast that to, have you Dick Pronicki?
No, not that I can think of, no.
Okay, so if you put a quick search here, Alone in the Wilderness, just put that in the Google search. It's a classic PBS series that I think goes back to either the 80s or maybe even the 70s, Alone in the Wilderness. And it's one of those PBS series that millions and millions of people watch. And so the character, the real life person, was a guy named Dick Pronicki, who was he was in the Air Force. I think he was a mechanical engineer or something like that, and a diesel pilot or something. And he decided that he was just going to leave society, right? He was in his early 50s and he just decided, that's it, I'm done. And the amazing thing about this documentary is it shows him all on himself. He built that log cabin that you see there from his bare hands. And you see how incredibly skilled he was. And this guy not just survived, but he thrived in Alaska. Now, he had, I think, a float plane coming in twice a year to give him some basic supplies, you know, because there's only so much that you can grow in Alaska. Like he grows some onions and stuff like that. I think some carrots and potatoes, but there's not much. There's only like a 2-month or 3-month growing season, right? But he survives mostly off hunting, gathering sort of thing, right? And there's unlimited fish and all that. But this guy lived for over 30 years in Twin Lakes, Alaska, and they documented it. He himself brought a camera and he filmed himself going everywhere, and then they got a professional sort of guy to do the voiceover, and it's just a beautiful it's one of the most relaxing things you could ever watch on television. I mean, if anybody out there is listening to this and you're suffering from any form of sadness or depression, it's one of the sure cures when it comes to putting on your television to seeing something that is very organic and beautiful at the same time. And it shows you that, yes, people can survive in these places. They can, and they can do really well. But you have to have the skill. So in many ways, Dick Pronicke is the antithesis of that character from Alone in the Wilderness, or the Into the Wild character, right? Where this is a guy that had tremendous skill and worked hard every day, but got to live the lifestyle that he chose. So this is like an anti-Agenda 21 sort of productions. It predates a lot of their programming, I imagine. And so many people have been influenced by this because they say, well, you know, you can live somewhere beautiful away from it all, and but you have to work hard and you have to have those skills. And that's the whole thing. I mean, you can't just go out into nature and expect to survive. I know that, Daniel Day-Lewis, who is one of these, I don't know if you say a method actor, but he's British, right? But he when he's playing the character of Hawkeye in the film Last of the Mohicans, is an interesting sort of thing, because he actually went and lived that lifestyle for like 8 months or something like that, where before he even did the film, he spent almost a year living that lifestyle. So that when he's in the film and you see him playing the character, and it's an excellent biopic, by the way, the Last of the Mohicans, he's actually doing all those things. Like he's throwing the axe, he's using the bow so proficiently, because he learned all those skills in order to be able to pull off the role in the film. And the message being that in order to like free yourself of the dependency on this new world order and its devices and its convenience and all this, you have to be hard, you have to be strong, you have to be developed. What Dick Pronicke said when he was going around, he's saying, I could take one wrong step and twist my ankle or break my, and I would be dead, right? Because there's no one there to save you. But what does that force you to do? Well, it forces you to be at your optimum all the time. You can't just have a bad day and, be lackadaisical and just ho-hum and, maybe not tie up your shoelace or something like that, right? Like your life literally depends upon it. So when we think, this is why, and I talk about a lot, where, human beings should aspire to be much more of a caveman mindset than of what they're programming us into, because the caveman was a far more capable person than the average person, a far smarter, infinitely physically more capable person, and a person that was really living life in many ways the way that we're supposed to, in full nature, and surviving off the nature around them, sort of thing. Doesn't mean you have to cut out everything and all that, but I think that it's very interesting when you contrast that. I find a lot of these horror films that I see, and I've watched a ton of them dealing with people in the wilderness, that is the theme. The theme is like, you're screwed. Your phone cuts out. You're just, right away.
You're incapable. You need us to look after you. You know,
Exactly.
When paraphrasing it a bit, quote from Plato, when all the enemies are done with, the leader will create more because he always needs an enemy so that the people need him.
Yeah.
You know, they need an enemy to make you scared of, so that then you ask them to look after you. So in the same way, they want you to be frightened of the wilderness and to feel incapable of any of this kind of stuff, so that you stay away from it and you stay in the big urban areas where they want you to stay.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that theme is very prevalent in so many of these films that people are being programmed. And then you think about like just interesting conspiracies, like say for instance, the whatchamacallit, tick there, the deer tick, Lyme's disease, which came out of Plum Island. Which there's a huge
bio-creation.
Yeah, bio-creation. But in my opinion, almost a perfect Agenda 21 tool. And in Midsummer, when you watch this film, remember that, because there's a scene where they're walking, and and it's very interesting because the characters, the males again, are extremely contemporary, wimpy, sort of not physically capable, dependent on their technology type of characters. And one of them was like, are there ticks in this? Are there ticks in this grass? I mean, I'm seriously scared of ticks, you know? And yeah, and then like some of the other characters that are there are making jokes, but the guy doesn't really know if they're serious or not. Or like, yeah, my uncle got, got bit by a tick and he died slowly, painfully over 8 months or something like that. The guy's like, you're freaking me out now. But I thought it was interesting because you throw that in to the whole narrative, because people are terrified of ticks now because of Lyme disease, right? And it's like, it's another reason not to go in the woods. It's another reason to be afraid of nature. And isn't it perfect that it came out of a biological sort of weapons development experimental island called Plum Island, and now it's spread right up the eastern coast and right down the eastern coast, and it's like people are terrified of getting this tick bite.
Even on normal grass. So it's getting to the stage, they're taking it to the stage now where they're encouraging more people to have artificial grass, artificial lawns, so that they alleviate any risk of ticks, so that their kids can play on the fake grass and you don't have to worry about them possibly getting ticks.
And how crazy is that? Because it goes back to what I was saying before, like being the typical boy in the wilderness as a kid, and being in the mud and building the tree forts, and being in the swamps and catching all the snakes and salamanders and everything, bullfrogs, and now it's like these kids that many of them are going to be very confused about their identity, might change genders, might undergo all kinds of sexual confusion and everything else, are going to be growing up. I mean, how much is that going to play into the fact that they're growing up in these sterile, artificial environments, and then of course immersed into the virtual reality and eventually the brain chips and all that coming down the pipe not too long from now. But you've got, you're manufacturing people, you're manufacturing marshmallows in many ways, like these soft, incapable people who will beg for the conveniences and the safety of, and it's, yeah, go ahead.
And the pharmaceuticals, because in that softening effect, you're reducing people's immune systems such that they will go out into the countryside, into the wilderness, and they might pick some up that normally any normal body would be able to fight off, but because they've grown up in such a controlled environment, they will more likely succumb to it. And over generations, that vulnerability will become worse. So people will learn to not go into the wilderness because you'll get ill and something bad might happen to you.
Yes, exactly. And so that's it. It's
I do think that they are deliberately trying to manipulate people's biology and their psychology such that they will have a requirement, a need to be within an artificial environment, because our bodies won't be able to cope anymore with the rigors of living out in the wild like that guy. You know,
Yes,
you won't,
yes.
your body just won't be able to stand it.
There's another excellent film called Dersu Usala. Have you ever heard of that one? It's a
I'm
Kira
not sure.
Kurosawa. Kira Kurosawa, probably the most famous Japanese director who did the Seven Samurai. So Dersu.
I think I need to stop the screen share for a minute. My browser's starting to lag out severely.
Oh, yeah.
It probably just means the memory's filling up on it, so I need to stop the screen share for a bit, close that tab, and then try it again.
Dersu Usala is an excellent film. It's not a horror film. It's an unbelievably epic film that is so good at atmosphere. And it's Russian. All right, well, it's Russian. It's set in Russia. It's set in Siberia, and I believe Kira Kurosawa. If people are listening, Kira Kurosawa is one of my favorite directors. One of the best directors. He did the Seven Samurai and Ran and all these amazing epic. I mean, he's probably best known for his Japanese samurai epic films, but he's one of the most influential directors ever. One of the most one of the best eyes in terms of visuality, and his films are just spectacular to watch. And this is one of his best ones. And it's very, very interesting because it's a group of Russian soldiers who are surveying Siberia, the wilderness of Siberia in the early 20th century. And the leader, the captain, the leader befriends a native, and he's more or less Asian, but like there's a big mix of those types of people in that area, right? Sort of thing, right? Because you're fairly close to Japan and Mongolia and places like that, right? So there's this Asian character who lives alone, and you find out his story, his tragic story later. But he's well, I think he's in the film, he's well into his, maybe the first time you see him, he's in his 60s, but he gets older as the film goes along, because the film goes back, or it covers several decades, if I'm not mistaken. But the captain of the surveying sort of military team becomes best friends with the native, who becomes their scout. He shows them everything, right? He takes them everywhere. He teaches them how to survive. And one of the most epic scenes, I think, in film history is when him and the captain are stranded. They're out in the wintertime, and they get separated from the rest of the group, and they're on like some frozen riverbed, and a storm comes in, and it's like before the storm even comes in, the native guy is saying, cut all the grass that you can get, like the tall grass that's in the reeds. Cut it all as quick as you can. He's screaming at the guy, and he knows that there's a storm, and then the storm comes in, and while the storm is coming in and they're cutting the grass frantically, the Russian captain succumbs to fatigue, and he just passes out. And when he wakes up, he's in a hut that this incredibly amazing sort of native guy built out of just like tall grass, basically in the middle of a freaking torrential blizzard, like just a brutal, freezing cold blizzard. And he saved their lives, basically. And the story kind of shows, but at a point where he gets too old and he can no longer function, and they try to integrate him into society, and it doesn't work, because he's just been out by himself in wilderness forever, and he is, but he's too old to live in wilderness, because he can no longer like shoot properly, like his vision is starting to decline and all that, so he can't survive. Very beautiful, powerful film that I think is a testament to it's the antithesis of many of these horror films, where yes, you can survive. Very much along the same line as the film I mentioned, well, the real film, the documentary Alone in the Wilderness with Dick Pronicki. The ability of capable human beings to not only overcome nature, but to thrive within nature. And this is what I think in many ways they are programming us against. They are and nature too is such a huge part. I mean, you could even say the Wicker Man in many ways is an embracement of nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many of their rituals involve the celebration of insects and animals, and as you said, when they're doing the maypole and the whole May Day celebrations, everyone's adopting um, animal sort of characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
The salmon of knowledge, for instance, just a respect for nature itself and an understanding of how essential and important it is in nature. I think they want us to fear nature more than anything. And I think that's why so many of these movies have been coming out with this theme of people being lost in the woods. Evil Dead, even to a certain extent. Have you ever seen the original Evil Dead?
Again, it's another one I got on VHS. It's one of my favorite horror movies.
Yeah.
The first two. I think you have to watch the first two together. If you watch just the first one on its own, I don't know, it's just not quite there. Whereas in the second one, they get the formula spot on, and it's a bit comedy, it's a bit horror, and it works really well as a whole thing.
Yeah. I agree with that. I do like the third one too, which is more beloved by the later sort of generations that embraced the Evil Dead, right? Because it was more of a parody sort of thing. But you could say Evil Dead again. I mean, probably not. I mean, probably way back. When I look at these films, I look at, like, that's why I said with Halloween, I said I look into the history of Halloween, how it was developed, the whole thing, and then you can see if there's a narrative. It's a different era now. It's a different era because there's only a few studios. There's, they're the ones that are churning out all these films. It's usually Disney that is making your horror films. It's usually, or it's an entity. It's an arm of Disney sort of thing. So the agendas are massively a huge part. They're almost front and center. Whereas in the past, you could just kind of come up with a cool idea, maybe be influenced by other films and say, I've got an idea for a horror film. I'm going to take you this. So, I think that's very interesting, and I've noticed these fear of nature type films for the last few decades and how they seem to be more and more these days.
There's a connection as well to this could be some of the reasoning that may not be conscious to the people writing it, unless they're being given instruction by others. There's an element of the ancient religions, the pagan, what would normally be called the pagan belief systems, and it's epitomized in Wicker Man and stories like that, probably in Midsummer as well, from what you're telling me, what other people have told me about. Right. Because part of the paradox is at the surface, most people think that those kind of beliefs are worshipping death. They're not. They're worshipping life and death as a whole thing. Yeah. Because there can't be life without death, and there isn't death without life. So you don't look at one or the other as a separate entity, as if it exists in a vacuum. It's two together. It's both and, not either or. But part of what they've been doing for many years now is playing on this female energy archetype of the change that comes out of that paradox, because when one thing dies, something else is born. So not only are how to explain this is a bit difficult to explain. The nature itself gives you your existence. So the natural world is your birth mother, which is why in most cultures it's referred to in the female. You say Mother Nature, and almost every culture around the planet has at one time or another paid homage in some form to that female energy of the natural world that gives us life. But now we're being told that this natural world is bad or is dangerous. or is sickly, and from its sickliness, its sickness, it causes us harm. In other words, the kind of climate change bullshit.
Yeah.
So people are stuck in this paradoxical psychological dissonance that, well, you're telling me that this thing that gives me life is now also killing me. And it's that Kali energy, which I know we've talked about this kind of stuff before. It's them utilizing that Kali energy of, it is the female, the archetype that we normally see as being the thing that gives us life, enables life, but it is that now that you must be afraid of, and you must see it as the destructor, like Kali. It may be the female energy, but this time it's coming to kill you. It's dangerous.
And they've been using that. It's interesting that you mentioned Kali, because do you remember a few years back when they were flashing like on the I think it was the Empire State Building, and they were showing these huge images on the Empire State Building of nature, but they also showed Kali. And it was like they were showing, animals like gorillas and whales, and then they would show Kali. It's like, whoa. So like one of their rituals, I totally agree that they are doing this. It's the creator and the destroyer sort of thing.
The academic plausible deniability, or what they would use as a plausible deniability, is that the deity referred to as Kali is just the destructive part of Shiva. So it's not a complete, again, like I was talking about earlier, it's not a complete story to concentrate or to fixate on just the Kali element of that archetype. That would be their excuse of like, we're using Kali imagery to represent the rebirth that comes after the destruction. And that's what that archetype represents, in the tradition of the religion, of the culture that it comes from. But they know full well, because they're the ones that structure the education and the cultural media to insert and then reinforce the misconceptions that the majority have, that whenever you show them an image of Kali or reference Kali, all they think about is destruction. Destruction, beheading, blood, war. It's all the bad stuff. They don't understand the archetypal concept of this represents a principle. It's not a physical entity or something that's going to come and get you. But the majority of people have that very simplistic misinformation about what it represents. So the system sticks Kali all over everything, like the laser light show on the Empire State Building. And what impression does it give to the general populace? That it's something destructive and they should be afraid, and the natural world is somehow bad and he's going to get them.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really interesting. I mean, that again too. It's like we're always being hit with these symbols. And most people are just oblivious to it. I think most people wouldn't even understand that it is Kali or Shiva or anything like that. Like they just shrug it off and dismiss it, and it's like, well, it's not something that's out of Disney, so I don't recognize it necessarily, or I don't identify with that, so they'll just dismiss it. And the people that are more aware, more in tune of what they're going on, can decipher it and see what they're exactly what they're trying to do. And when you understand, like, or at least what I believe that they're trying to do, and this order out of chaos, it all makes sense, right? What they're doing to humanity. Go ahead.
They aren't the ones that wield the flaming torches and the pitchforks.
No, it's
they
exactly.
persuade other people to do.
Isn't that interesting too? Because
that is.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say that is the magic. I know I'm doing my finger bunny ears. Forget how you got the camera on. Yeah, that is the magic that they perform.
Yeah,
primarily. They persuade other people through deception and misdirection and trickery, the classic kind of illusionist magician's tricks.
Yeah.
And they manipulate the gaps in people's psychology, the things that they know can be triggered and things like that. So that the people themselves pick up the pitchforks and the torches and destroy the village, so that then they can come in and go, oh, look at this chaos. But if you follow my flag, if you follow our rule, we'll bring order back again.
Yeah, it's interesting because I caught, Frankenstein, the original one, the other day. I've seen it, of course, several times before. Just kind of had it in the background while I was doing some work. But that was one of the things that struck me. It's one of the more iconic scenes of Frankenstein, the original Frankenstein, of course, where the pitchfork and torches mob, how they manifest, right? Like very, very interesting, because it's like there's no trial, there's no investigation, there's no nothing. The little girl is carried down the street during the wedding, sort of the big festival. The entire town is celebrating and getting drunk and merry, and Dr. Frankenstein's marrying his beautiful wife, right? And then all of a sudden, one of the townspeople comes and he's carrying the body of the little girl that was drowned, right? And you just see the mood as it's very well shot. I mean, to this day, you just gotta really, that film is epic. It's a masterpiece in many ways.
It was cutting edge at the time.
Yeah, it still is. I don't think they could ever do it.
The height of,
I think Boris Karloff.
The height of cinematography.
Yeah, Boris Karloff is just incredible in it too. Or is it? No, yeah, it's Boris Karloff, right? I get Bela Lugosi and Boris mixed up, Lon Chaney, all these characters. But the that scene, so they're walking, the guy's walking down the street, walking down, the main drag sort of thing. And it's beautiful, say 19th century Germanic village, right? And everyone's out celebrating, getting drunk and dancing. And then the scene just changes so quickly as people start reacting to seeing the dead little girl. And within no time, a full mob is mobilized, like a full mob, and everybody's out for blood. And I just thought, wow, this is an excellent example of how easy it is to manipulate mobs, and the mob mentality. I mean, I think Frankenstein, maybe you could bring that up. Is your screen share?
Every time I try and open a tab now, it just lags out.
Oh, okay, forget it then. We'll just talk it out. But that scene, which culminates in the end, where they go up to the windmill there, and they burn the windmill down with Frankenstein in it, sort of thing. That whole scene really is very powerful, very, very powerful. And it's like, and again, if you just step away for a second, because we're watching the film and we're seeing, in fact, the original film as it was released removed the scene. So if you remember the scene, I'll explain it to folks here. Now, again, it's not Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I don't even know if Mary Shelley actually wrote Frankenstein. That's the story we get, who knows, right? But it's irrelevant and regardless. But the film itself kind of stands on its own. The scene is that Frankenstein has escaped from the castle, and he's wandering about in the countryside, and he comes across this little girl. And this little girl, instead of shrieking and being horrified, immediately wants to play with him, right? And he's never experienced anything, right? He's just been born, basically, right? So he's playing with this little girl, and she's showing him she's taking the heads off flowers and throwing them in the water, and they're floating. And he's like, oh, and he's doing the same thing, and he's amazed. And all of a sudden he runs out of flowers, so he picks her up stupidly and throws her in the water. He doesn't understand. He has no concept, right? Originally, when they released that, they cut that scene. Yeah. So the scene shows Frankenstein meeting the little girl, but doesn't show him throwing her in the water because they deemed it was too disturbing. Which is it's good that the reissues have reinserted that scene, because I think it's very important, because as the viewer, we're seeing Frankenstein do something that he doesn't understand, right? And therefore he didn't want, you'd have to say he didn't want to kill a little girl. He just wanted to play with her, but he didn't understand. And he's just this giant super powerful ogre that just, and so, if you cut out that scene though, and you watch it like most people would, you wouldn't really know what happened directly to the girl. You would assume that Frankenstein drowned her. But even then, without the scene, that's what your assumption probably would be watching the film. With the scene, then you see, well, he killed her, but he didn't really mean to. He didn't understand. But nonetheless, the result is the same. The entire town mobilizes in an instant against them, picks up the torches and the pitchforks and hunts them down like a mob, and with wild dogs and everything. And the poor monster, and he's monster because he's a monster, right? There's no other reason really. He's just a creation. The poor monster has no alternative, and then he ends up taking out his anger and frustration on his creator. So he strikes down his creator, which you could break down in other themes as well. But I thought that was really powerful, the way that the film, the last portion, the last act of the film carried out that way and showed that mob mentality. There's another film out of Hollywood, and again, who runs Hollywood, but it's called the Oxbow Incident, which is, I think, from the 1930s. And it's a classic Western in which there is cattle that's stolen, and I think somebody's killed or something, and the people are outraged in the little town, and they immediately form a posse and they go to hunt down these three likely perpetrators, and no trial is given, and these people are executed basically on the spot, like they're hung up. Right. And then you find out later that no, they didn't do anything. They were completely innocent, right? But I find that interesting because the mob mentality is such a powerful weapon that is used today. I mean, you look at Twitter, for instance, right? Like, Twitter is mob mentality. People just react. They see something and they react instantly to it. Like, there's no real thought process into what you're seeing. People, and if there is, I mean, there really isn't, to a certain extent, but you would say it's kind of like putting on the television. You're angry about al-Baghdadi, or you're angry about, Bashir al-Assad, or, you're angry about whatever CNN or whatever you're watching is telling you to be angry about. You might be angry about conspiracy theorists or white supremacists, for instance. Like, you see a bunch of guys with tiki torches. Next thing you know, somebody's getting hit by a car in Charlottesville. And then you're just like, these people this is awful. We can't have this. And it's like the mob becomes the instrument of destruction.
Is a bit of a strange esoteric connection, possibly not coincidental or random. And you talk about the mob is blind. The mob, I don't mean they physically, individually can't see, but the mob mentality is blind. Yes. It will just react, and it will do things before people realize what has happened. So you get situations like people getting hung before they realize that they had nothing to do with the crime.
Yes, yes.
But at the same time, the mob is blind, but the one-eyed man is king, because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man can lead the blind. And what is a television but not a single eye that sits in the corner of the room? So the one eye leads the blind of the mob to react and attack whatever Frankenstein's monster that they put in front of it.
Yes, it's one of the reasons why they use that symbolism.
Yeah,
it's perfect. Because
another element, I think, I don't want to stick too much onto Frankenstein, but the windmill could be said to represent the Wicker Man, and the monster, again, because he is if you read the book, he is a true innocent. Yeah. Because he's totally created from scratch. He's like a newborn baby, but he's got the body of a 20-stone man with muscles. Yeah. So really, again, he's portrayed as the innocent victim, the lamb taken to the slaughter. And the storyline unfolds in a similar fashion of the general populace reject him because he's something different. In other words, he's innocent. He doesn't have all of the illusionary masks and facades of bullshit that most people have about themselves, that they portray to each other. And Instagram and Twitter and the social media platforms epitomize that falsehood of people pretending to be something that they're not. Yeah, he's literally just what he is.
And yeah, in the Robert De Niro version, the more modern with Kenneth Branagh, which has some elements. I think the Frankenstein element, the Robert De Niro portraying, does a really great job as Frankenstein. And you're sympathetic towards him because it is much more in line with the original book, right? Where he is more or less innocent, and it's only when everything goes against him that he becomes the monster kind of thing, right? That he acts out in rage. But there's a scene where he's watching a family and he's just blown away. Like he's just, so in wanting of that type of love. And then he befriends, albeit as briefly as you could imagine, a blind man, because the blind man, has no judgment towards his physical, because he's horribly scarred, and it's actually really, the makeup is incredible in that particular version. And the blind man brings him in and treats him like a human being and feeds him and brings him into his home. And then when, and they're actually hitting it off. And then all of a sudden the other family members come back home and they immediately start beating on him and chase him out. And he starts crying and sobbing, and you feel nothing but sympathy for the monster. Which is, it's the way that the tragic story should be told. And I mentioned the other one there before, The Bride, which again is I almost recommend it. It's the one with Sting, and Sting is just terrible. He's
yeah.
He's in his 80s, total, with his hair and everything, and he's just mailing in the part, sort of thing. But the real good story in that is the Frankenstein monster befriends a little midget, and the two of them together become a successful circus act. But the midget gets brutally murdered, and that enrages Frankenstein. But I thought that element in the movie really made the movie watchable, because it was like you were really into that storyline of seeing the monster actually become human and be treated and become allowed to become an actual person. But yeah, I think the Frankenstein theme of this creation of life is another huge, and we haven't really discussed that tonight on this show, but so many of these movies, like the Island of Dr. Moreau, which the best version of that film by a million miles is the original, which is called Island of the Lost Souls, which came out in the 1930s. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. Which is so well done. The makeup and the creatures are actually better than they were in the 90s and 70s versions that came later. But in the Island of Dr. Moreau, you have a mad sort of scientist who has his own island. He's able to carry out whatever experiments he wants to carry out, and he's trying to take animals and remold them into human beings, and then teach them to be human beings. And it's a different sort of theme that what you would like. You could a really good sort of director and writer could weave that into a modern narrative where you have the trans species right now, which is something that is already being experimented on. And I guess there's a lot of movies that go back with that theme of merging different species together. I can think of a few offhand, sort of thing. You probably know.
Yeah, but I was also just thinking that they haven't really done that many in that kind of manner for the past several years, maybe more. Instead, it's been more about merging with the machine in some fashion.
That's true. Yeah.
I think they are deliberately trying to keep the concept of the genetic alterations or the chimera effect of like the CRISPR babies phenomenon. They've kept that somewhat out of that level of cultural media. You'll hear it talked about in the news, or a new science report says this, that, or the other. They talk about the latest developments and stuff like that. But in terms of the kind of cultural media output, it's nothing. I can't think of it in any way that it's there. It's always something electronic instead, or virtual.
Yeah. There are. I mean, I did mention. I mean, The Thing, obviously, The Thing. I think was one of the greatest horror films of all time. I'm talking the 1982 version, of course. But that kind of gets into that theme a little bit, where you have some sort of alien creature that is mimicking humans. And what's interesting about The Thing, I mean, one of the reasons why it works so well is that the characters that have been incorporated into The Thing, this is a big New World Order theme as well, you could say, don't even know that they're The Thing.
Yeah.
Like that they, all of a sudden their body starts to morph and change into some different creature, or starts to try to absorb, but they're almost oblivious. It's like they're taken over. And the theme could be The Thing could be broken down in many levels. I mean, some people say it's about feminism, for instance, because you have a bunch of men, that are living in this foreign, horrible, unlivable sort of way, but they're all men. And I don't think that's accidental. I mean, you could say at the time that was probably a realistic depiction of what a scientific outpost in Antarctica would look like, right? That there would be no women. It's interesting that the 50s version, I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah.
They actually do have a female character in that one. Right.
I like those old sci-fi movies. I've got loads of them on video.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I've got the original Thing, but I thought it obviously everybody gets disappointed by the special effects, because basically it's just a guy who looks like he's got a cabbage for a head.
Yeah, it's true. He's like a big vegetable.
The storyline at the time was quite innovative.
Yes.
So to me, that was what I enjoyed about it. It was an idea expressed through science fiction that was something new and interesting, and get your teeth into that kind of thing. Not the cabbage head, of course. But,
well, yeah, I still think it holds up fairly well. You have to, I have no problem when it comes to watching a film and appreciating the film and not being like, oh, that looks so fake. If it's a really good movie, and it does, I know probably a lot of people listening here would agree with the practical versus CGI. That CGI, especially the 90s CGI that was used in so many horror films, just looks horrible today. It looks so fake. Whereas the Thing still looks amazing. It's still jaw-dropping how incredible the special effects are. And it's because they're practical effects as opposed to any sort of digital manipulation or CGI. And that is incredible. I love Ray Harryhausen. I don't know if you're familiar with the creature, the claymation animation sort of. I love that stuff. I love
Adventures of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts, all that.
Oh, I love the Jason Argonauts. I mean, I think it's incredible. If you could just appreciate how much skill it took to deliver those scenes, and the characters have so much. I mean, the creatures have so much character to them. Watch
the scene with the children of the Hydra's teeth. See, I've watched it that often. I know most of the lines from the movie. Yeah, where he throws out the teeth and they rise up as skeletons.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Some of the Argonauts. Those scenes alone, for the time that it was made, it's astounding how well they still hold up.
Oh, I think today you can almost appreciate them more, because you're just like, wow, they did this in the 1960s or whatever, and it's like, whoa. So yeah, I have no problem getting into a film as long as I know, I'll say the CGI is a big turnoff. So if it's a film and it has really bad, it could be a good film that has bad CGI scenes, and that can spoil the whole effect. and it's interesting to this day. A lot of directors, Cronenberg is one of the best for that. He absolutely hates CGI, so he never uses CGI in any film. He's the Existence is a great example, because that fleshy sort of organic, messy, gross, but sexual at the same time, that was so integral to him delivering his sort of messages in these films, or his heavy themes in these films. The Fly, of course, it looks fantastic still. Like the transformation, it's like a work of art. It's like, how on earth did they do that? And they did it live, and it's captured, and it's like, wow. I really love that stuff, and I think that you really, that's, to me, is movie magic. And movie magic is, and just these special effects, Rob Bottin, for instance, people like that were like these incredibly talented special effects. Like The Thing is just mind-boggling. It's so good. It's so terrifying. You could never make it better. They made a prequel in 2011. It's not terrible, but it's just, and the interesting thing too about the prequel that they made is they originally did it with all the practical effects, and then they changed it before they released it to put CGI. And it's like, I would love to see just the practical effects version of that film, probably a lot better, because the CGI didn't work. It was just like every scene is like, oh, that doesn't look real. And that, the film was kind of a bad idea to begin with, because it's like a prequel, so the outcome is already known. that can work in some ways, but I think that, the Thing prequel just flopped, because it was up against something that it was obviously trying to pay homage to. But I those are incredible films that remain relevant today, and you can interpret them in many different ways. Alien as well. Alien has a very strong female theme in it. The what's his name there, the artist that depict the Geiger, right? And like his obsession with uteruses and vaginas and stuff. Yeah.
Sexual elements. You look at his actual artwork. What you see in the Alien movies is a toned down version of his artwork. If you just go and look through his artwork, it is almost all of it has got some kind of sexual element in it.
It's really fascinating. And then if you look at Alien from that, and then you look at, well, who's the lead character, wonderfully played by Sigourney Weaver. It's one of the greatest sci-fi. It's a horror. It is a horror, really, when you think about it. It's just set in space, but it's a horror. It's a terrifying movie, and it's so well done. And again, it's one of those examples. The less you see, the more you're scared, and you don't really see the full Alien till the end. Right. And then maybe you can make out a bit in one or two scenes that it's a guy in a suit, but the suit is so incredibly well done that you could just let it fly. But the female sort of narrative, the feminist narrative, which I think they have, like, I'd say Alien, I'd say The Thing, I'd say a lot of these movies, that is one of the big themes, that the female, I don't know how long the feminist agenda of the New World Order has been around, but you'd have to say, well, it probably predates the suffragette movement and many other things, because they orchestrated those for better or for worse, right? But the feminist theme is huge these days in these films, and I think these earlier horror films were setting the table for this. I think these were, like, you look at Alien, that's a big budget film.
Don't forget some of the classics as well, like Carrie.
Yeah, Carrie. Yeah, that's again, Stephen King, who really hates Christianity. Obviously, but Carrie is. I haven't seen that in so long, but that's one of those ones I gotta.
There is a remake of that now as well, which was pretty monotonous. It's not got the same kind of atmosphere as the original.
Yeah. The original two had the terrific performances there from the Carrie herself, Sissy Spacek, and the mother. They're all gonna laugh at you. It's just like, wow. And that's a typical Stephen King novel. I read all the Stephen Kings when I was a kid, and his glory days were the 70s. Like, that's when his best work came out, because he was really struggling and dealing with alcoholism and problems with his wife, and that in fact, The Shining it kind of alludes to that he might have been physically abusive to his wife. And actually The Shining is all about pedophilia, really. The movie is not the book, but the movie is all about pedophilia, or at least that's the creepy theme underneath the whole surface, is that it's pedophilia. And the scene, if you watch it again, you look for the one-eyed bear symbolism, which is the symbol of pedophilia. But if you look at the extremely disturbing scene with Jack Nicholson, who gives a masterful performance when he's with Danny in the bedroom there, and he's in his bathrobe, that is like such a I would never ever hurt you, it's like, that is such a creepy scene. Again, a masterpiece, really, in my opinion. The Shining, you could never really exceed that on film. I mean, when you get a brilliant filmmaker in Stanley Kubrick, and just the vision and the atmosphere that he creates in that film, it's better than the book, like hands down, in my opinion. And I like the book, but I think the film is just taking it to a whole different level.
One of the all-time classics, and I know people hate the author, hate the producer, the maker of the film and whatever, but that doesn't deny his ability to make brilliant cinema. Rosemary's Baby.
Oh yeah, they're brilliant. Yeah, what's his name? Roman Polanski.
Yeah, I was just trying to recall other classic kind of movies, or very influential movies that had a very strong female element or female
think
role.
Of that one with Rosemary's Baby. So if you just discard the satanic cult and all that, you got the childbirth theme and the horrible, like the sickness of childbirth, which I think is coded in the film. Like, I think in many ways, you watch the transformation of the Mia Farrow character going from, in the opening scenes, a blissful, happy, and then when she gets pregnant, everything starts to change. And then she chops her hair off, right? So she gets that hairdo, which was again, a feminist sort of thing back in the 60s, right? That there was a huge amount of feminism pushed by the New World Order back in like every decade, but certainly the 1960s, where they would have women, with very short hair, and you see her change, and then she becomes more gaunt, and like her complexion changes, and she becomes more sickly as the story progresses. Now, if you're watching the story on the surface, or you're watching it, that she's got Satan's child or something, or she was raped by the devil or whatever, right? In a really creepy, well-filmed sort of scene. But if you discard that and you just look at it, it's almost like a depopulation theme again, where it's like putting the fear of child and being pregnant in women. It's like a horror story for women pregnancy. And miscarriage. Exactly. Like it almost is a metaphor for miscarriage, like that you're going to go through all this, you're going to endure, your body's going to be stretched to the limit, and then there's a chance that the baby will just come out rotten, right? And so in many ways, that's the way I look at Rosemary's Baby. It's not called Satan's baby. It's Rosemary's Baby. Right? So, I would say that definitely is a very, very interesting film that I think really pushes these themes. The Omen is another one. The Omen is very similar in many ways to Rosemary's Baby. Because, again, you think with The Omen, excellent film, too, with a tremendous score. Like, the music is just out of this world in that film. And Gregory Peck is just so... he's just so perfect in the role. You just totally buy him as like an ambassador. He just got that swagger and that look to him, right? So it's a great film. But you think about it, Gregory Peck in the beginning of the film, his wife all of a sudden, goes into labor, and I think they're in vacation in Rome or something, and it's like he doesn't know what happened. He doesn't see anything, right? But they just come and tell him the baby, it died, right? And that's it. And so, he's left with the decision. Well, Do you want your wife to know that, you know, she went through all this struggle and pain and then the baby dies? You know, wouldn't it be much better just to have take this baby and pretend it's hers? And it's, you know, you think about the ethics in it, and then you think about the feminist element to it, because here it is, the patriarchy once again. You know, Gregory Peck represents that patriarchy. He once again, he is the one that sets the whole chain in order. Like, it's his decision, because he wants to spare his wife the pain of you know, undergoing a painful miscarriage and losing a child. And he's desperate to pass on his legacy, because he's, you know, he's heir apparent. He might be the next prime, or might be the next president of the United States, kind of thing. Like, he's a big time player, sort of thing. So you've got that patriarchy wanting to, you know, have that offspring, and he makes that decision, and that sets the whole tone of the film. In fact, one of the things that the filmmakers with The Omen tried to do is they claim this, but it to me, it doesn't hold up. It was where they claim that, you know what, you can interpret the whole film as just paranoia, and that the kid was actually innocent, right? And that it was just, you know, the male losing his sanity, sort of thing, and that eventually goes insane and starts to believe his kid is. But really, if you, because you could all the deaths that happen they could all be waved off as coincidences, albeit horrible coincidences, like the reporter getting his head cut off. I'm sure you've seen the movie, so I'm not spoiling anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you think about it, you think about the female character. I think it's Lee Grant that plays the role there. In many ways, it's a horrific thing, because with her, she starts to think that her child is evil, and it's not her child.
Yep.
And you think, how many women go through a similar thing in their life, where they start to look at their child and they just, you know, it's not.
Especially if their partner has that kind of attitude about the child. Because it could also be viewed as being, I don't know if there's a academic terminology for this, there might be, but like a reverse Oedipus effect.
Yes.
Where the father sees the young son as a threat to his dominance of the family unit. So he's subconsciously seeing the child as being evil and causing all these accidents and horrible things to happen. But really, it's his own desire to get rid of the child because he sees it as competition.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because yeah, you could definitely, especially if you take that tact that the filmmakers suggest, that you could chalk up the whole thing to coincidences and just the male, you know, losing his sanity.
In that respect, then, who would be the one that is most under the influence of Satan?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I know, you know, the whole story really is based on that premise, isn't it? You know, the coming of the Antichrist.
Yeah.
But you could look at it and say, well, hang on, if the child is innocent and it's all just these coincidences, and all that is playing into this guy's some kind of paranoid schizophrenia where he thinks the child is the son of Satan, and then doesn't that mean the father, in doing what he's trying to do, where, you know, he drags him into the church and tries to kill him with the daggers and all that, you know, is neither one under the influence of Satan, because he's convinced this guy that his own son is evil, that he has to kill. Yeah,
that's really interesting, and like, I can't watch the film with that viewpoint. Like, I watched the film, it's Satan's child, you know?
I see it more as an adventure movie. I know it is a horror movie, but the way, especially if you watch all of them,
that's the thing, though. It's like there's a whole, I mean, I don't think I've seen any beyond the third one, but there's a trilogy to The Omen, and they're all very good. I think they're all definitely worth watching. I think the only downfall of the third one is the ending that's just so abrupt and unsatisfactory. But the second one is very interesting as well, because it shows him, you know, in adolescence, and there's some really interesting elements in it, including the Monsanto type corporation that is
Mhm.
Thorn, right? The Thorn
Yeah.
Industries, and how it very much mirrors what was happening in the 1990s and 2000s in India, where Monsanto was, basically, taking over the agricultural industry by subjecting all the farmers, all the poor Indian farmers, to their seeds. Like the seeds would blow in the wind, and then Monsanto, with the patent, would come in and claim. And then there, like hundreds of thousands, I don't know what the number is, but hundreds of thousands of Indians committed suicide because of Monsanto. It's the most evil corporation ever. But
Yeah.
Thorn is in many ways the embodiment of that. And this is a precursor, because I think even at that time, Monsanto might have been
Oh, yeah.
Searles still
It,
at that
it,
time. But
it was
yeah, go ahead.
deliberately pointing at that industry, because at
Yeah.
the time when I first watched it, it was, I don't want to say eye-opening, because it didn't happen for me exactly at
Yeah.
the moment of watching the movie, but it helped. It was a stepping stone for me to start to see through some of that media control, through the kind of things they were showing us in movies. Because you watch that movie, you think they're talking about what's happening now in the world with the food industry,
20
and
years later.
it was the, I don't want to say beginnings of, but it helped the gears in my head start working more towards going, hang on a minute, there's a lot of coordination between what's going on in the agendas in the real world and what they're showing us in the movies.
Yes. And these movies, and there's so many examples of them. The Boys from Brazil, another. I mean, it's all tribe, right? And it's they would release the book, and the book would be a New York Times bestseller, which is an automatic thing, right? It's, you stamp it on the cover, and it goes out, put it in the front row of the bookshelves. But like over and over again, whether it's Soylent Green, whether it's Boys from Brazil, or whether it's The Omen, there was a pattern that would happen with these movies, where the book would be released, New York Times bestseller, and then within no time, the film would be out. Like a year. Within a year, the film is coming out. And the Omen trilogy does really touch into, especially part 2 and even part 3, but certainly part 2. If people are listening and they're curious about it, I would definitely recommend. Don't watch part 2 if you haven't seen part 1, because part 1 is the best of the trilogy. But they're all definitely worthwhile watching. And the second one has that heavy agricultural takeover theme, and they preach it as. So you have satanic elements working within the corporation that are murdering people, basically, to be able to take control. So they're murdering all the people that would stand up to what they're trying to do, which is to take control of world food production. And they're experimenting with all these fertilizers, right? And so they're talking about, like the satanic sort of character. I think it's Robert Foxworthy is the actor, right? And he's the guy with the curly hair, and he's basically the guy in the corporation of Thorn. He's like second. I think he starts off as like third in command, but he has the second in command killed. And then when the main Thorn, who at that time is like, I think the brother, or I don't know what his connection is to the president of the United States, but he's like very close to the president of the United States. But the brother of the original Thorn, so the original Thorn who dies in the first movie when he's trying to kill his son, he takes control of the corporation Thorn, and he's a good person. He's depicted as a family man. He's extremely wealthy and somewhat aloof, and he spoils his kids and all that crap, but he's seen as a good person, and he doesn't want to hurt people. But the guys underneath him, there's one character that is Satan's minion, and they want to use the corporation of Thorn to take over the world's food production, and they basically come right out and say it, and they justify it by saying that we'll keep people alive, because people are starving. Famine's a huge deal. And if we can take control of the world's food production, then we'll keep these people alive. We'll put food in their bellies, sort of thing, regardless of how we do it. So it's a very interesting element that can't be coincidental that it was thrown into the film. The third one, too, which is very interesting, in one of the opening scenes, they're at some gathering, some party, and one of and this is like the aristocracy in Britain or whatever, right? Because he's the ambassador of Great Britain, or he's being appointed as he gets appointed because the real guy that was going to be appointed was killed by Satan, of course, in some ritual. But I remember they're at some social gathering, and that they're drinking wine, and they say, "I can't believe that this wine is actually made from soy." It's like, what? Oh my god, that's like 1980. I don't know. So like, and then if you look into it, the whole Monsanto and the genetically modified foods and the herbicides, pesticides, all the things that they've been developing, it goes way back. So it's very likely that they were coding much of this takeover in the film. And yeah, that's very interesting that I like that story. That is one of those films that helped, make you aware of what's going on, sort of thing, and make you question, because that's one of the purposes of doing a show like this, is to say, you know what, it's not always necessarily a bad thing. Like I can say probably the people that make films like Midsummer and Hereditary and others, which are not good people, or are not our friends. But nonetheless, you can watch these films and interpret them in multiple ways that can be very engaging and fruitful for discussion, and you can be illuminating. I hate to use that term, but you know what I mean. It can be something that can be a good way of talking to people about a lot of what's going on, because these are films that average people are watching. So it is a way of connecting to ordinary folk, maybe who aren't woke, as we might define it, sort of thing, and saying, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Because it's a way of cracking some nuts. You could say with The Omen too, don't you find that interesting, that, how much it's similar to Monsanto? And that could be a way of opening some doors, or cracking open some windows on some people, and planting some seeds. Pardon the pun. But it's very interesting. So
I've got to agree as well, because part of my approach has always been, rather than telling people to just not look at this stuff full stop, because for multiple reasons, but primarily because by doing so, all I'm doing is trying to be an authority for somebody else. And that doesn't work in the long run. That's the wrong way to approach things, and it doesn't actually help people in the long run, because you still leave them weak, such that they turn to another authority that will tell them what to do and what not to do. That's part of the reason why so many people are still entranced by the system and all the usual kind of cliches. But my point is, what I would rather do is help people develop the ability for themselves, so that they can look at these things and see the kind of stuff that we're talking about, see the symbology, see the manipulations, the psychological attacks, the way they include stuff that's deliberately meant to trigger you, and the connections and connotations of the way the media, I refer to it as the cultural media. So in other words, stuff that's fiction and, movies and books and whatever, the way they use that to steer people en masse, and to keep the majority of us in a mindset where we just go along to get along. And basically what a lot of people refer to as the beast system. We end up with these worse elements that seem to be like a building, as in they're escalating, they're slowly accumulating, such that the standards of morality get worse year by year, the state of your society gets worse, etc., etc. And I do strongly think that is because the majority of people can't see this kind of thing. They are in effect the blind, looking for somebody to turn the light on for them. So to me, it's better to look at this stuff, talk about it, try and approach it from as many different directions as you can, so you're not getting a skewed, biased point of view on something, because that's what the system likes to do with this stuff. And that empowers you more to be able to see the bad elements within this stuff, and say, yeah, okay, I enjoyed the movie, but I don't accept their premise and their psychological manipulation that means I'm now going to go out there and do something that they want me to do. So, for example, not have a family, or try and chop my sexual organs off and pretend to be something that I'm not. I'm being a little bit silly in what I'm using as examples, but that's just to make the point. If people are able to see through this stuff for themselves, to me, it doesn't degrade your faith in something higher. If you have a faith in something, it doesn't turn you into a bad person by looking at this stuff. It's only if you let it change your life. If you can see it for what it is and go, no, thank you. I ain't interested in that. I'm going the other direction. Thank you. That means you are stronger. You still have the power. I know it sounds a bit cheesy and cliched, but you're the one with the power. Yeah, all of the system relies on trickery primarily. They use force as a last resort because there isn't enough of them to deal with everybody else. So their main tool is trickery. So if you can see through the trickery, you're the one that still has the power. You're still in control of what you're choosing to do.
Well said. And I would reiterate too that this is a method of reaching people because, as I said, the average person is watching these things and many people are endearing themselves to them. So it's one of the reasons why I like to discuss horror films, because I like horror films, like I do. And yeah, there is, it's a simple thing. I mean, for the psychology of horror films, we need to feel sometimes unsettled and unsafe because that's the way the world is. And many times our sort of comfortable suburbanite lives or urban lives shield us from a lot of the harsh realities of the world, and so we want to feel those things because feeling those things is part of being a human being. They're part of our whole sensory sort of system that we have that works, and so we need to have those, and we get a release from them as well. But I mean, there can be a negative side to watching this stuff, especially if it's demoralizing you, and especially if it's giving you nightmares and making you anxious and stuff like that. But there also is a wonderful opportunity to take some of this this entertainment, as you properly sort of defined it before, and use it to connect with people. And this is, well, you're watching that, okay, I'm watching that too. Did you notice this? What did you think about that? Don't you find that's interesting? Just like we said with the Omen 2 and the Monsanto, the obvious Monsanto sort of metaphors that are being used in the film, that it's a wonderful way of actually opening up the door, a conversation to folks and discussing these things. So, I think that's a great spot to kind of close up the show. I know it's probably really late where you are, and I didn't expect to go this long because I know KJ's going. I didn't want to run over his show, but I'm sure he's been going for quite some time now. I just wanted to say a huge thanks to Harry Cookie Monster for coming on the show. And I think everyone that's listening to this definitely go and subscribe Cookie's channel. I'll put a link in the description to his channel, and maybe Cookie, you could leave a comment there in the chat and people can click on your link and go check you out. Cause you do, I think twice a week you do a show, is it?
On my channel, I do one show a week.
On Soul Excalibur.
Yeah.
Right.
But I join in with another show we do on the Reality Chat channel, where we just talk about news in general, what's been happening during the week, things like that.
Yeah, I love that. I was on your show earlier this week, and it was excellent. So everybody definitely go check that out. And great show. Really enjoyed discussing this, and I hope I want to say thanks to everybody in the audience. I know I didn't. I promised to interact with the chat, but this conversation just really took off, and it's kind of how it goes with these things. You go with the flow. I've been doing podcasts for so long. I know just let the horses run sort of thing is the best method. But thanks for everyone stopping by to listen to the show. Do make sure you're subbed to this channel as well, Jeff C. Alive, because a lot of people forget to hit the sub button, because this is where the only real place where I can kind of do these group shows because of the way that YouTube has dismantled their Google Hangouts. So I had to create a new channel to be able to do this. But yeah, great discussion, and many thanks. And anything you want to say in closing there, Cookie?
No, thank you for inviting me. I think you're right. You know, these movies are used as a major propaganda tool. So talking about these kind of subjects, and it's appropriate to do, you know, horror movies now because it's Halloween. So it's very relevant.
It's the season.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
anyways, okay, thanks everyone. Happy Halloween. I hope you have a great evening, and look forward to catching up with you all in the next one. Take care, everyone.